Hey guys, Spartan Theology here. I'm here with a couple friends of mine. Today, we just decided to have a little Google Hangout and discuss various topics. We might get into some biblical topics, scientific topics, philosophical. Well, obviously, we're starting off some philosophical discussion, and theism, and all that. We're just going to be responding to some videos. A lot of ignorance in the videos is a light way to put it. So we're just going to jump right into it. We have a video here by the Emperor Atheist, who I've invited to join, but he hasn't replied yet, so we'll just be waiting on that. This is his so-called debunking of the Kalam cosmological argument. I'm not too big on it, but in other words, this is how not to refute the Kalam. So we'll go ahead and start. And if you guys have anything you want to refute, just tell me to pause.
Sweet.
To prove the existence of God. I'm gonna try to make this video as short as possible. The reason why, like I said, I don't like to make my videos lectures.
Wait, you guys can hear it, right?
Yeah.
It's being glitchy on my end.
Yeah, I can hear it.
All right.
But there's a lot of different videos, a lot of different links, academic links, as far as on this particular argument. I'm going to explain the argument to those who probably never been introduced to this argument. The modern name for this argument, because of people like William Lane Craig, who's basically taken this argument, ancient argument, which was basically first invented or proposed by Thomas Aquinas.
No.
Oh, brother. Stop it.
Oh my God.
The Kalam was started by a Muslim apologist there, pal.
Al-Ghazali, in fact.
Al-Ghazali
And the cosmological argument has its basis in Aristotle.
Oh,
I mean,
boy.
my
Yeah.
goodness.
Dude.
56 seconds.
Oh.
He doesn't even. Oh boy. Oh gosh.
Oh, let us continue.
Catholic priest, philosopher. He's noted as being one of the greatest philosophers of the Western world. But anyway, today's modern world, William Lane Craig, who is basically a charlatan, I always say, but he has kind of reinvented this particular cosmological argument and calls it the Kalam cosmological argument that is supposedly prove this imaginary being that they call God.
Pause.
Yeah.
Craig has never said that this proves the existence of God or anything like that. I mean, it's a probabilistic argument, like all arguments.
Well, yeah. Like all evidential arguments is a probabilistic argument. That's right. Number two.
Basically, the evidence is the beginning of the universe, and that evidence of the beginning of the universe strongly supports theism over atheism. It doesn't logically follow that therefore theism is true. It just logically follows that the universe has a cause.
Actually,
right.
I would.
And notice how he
supports theism. I would say it supports more deism because, in some ways, it is absolutely compatible with theism. Like it's.
Well, yeah. It's a cumulative case.
Compatible with Islamic theism.
Right.
But I would say deistic. But the point is that's error number 2.
Right, and whom they call God. So I don't know if he's hinting at this is some type of argument for Christian theology, because it's not. This is an argument for theism in a generic sense. So I'm not really sure what he's getting at there. But again, all this argument does is just prove that this argument that has to be some type of personal, transcendent cause out there. So,
yeah, go ahead and play this.
The premises of this argument. Then I'm gonna explain basically the differences, which are not any difference between Thomas Aquinas' original cosmological argument and.
Pause. Yes, there are absolutely differences between the argument from motion and the Kalam cosmological argument. One is based on what is going on now, and one is based on the origin of the universe. I mean, there's a huge difference.
Oh gosh.
Can we please stop? Can we please stop saying Aquinas? Please stop saying that, because that is, it's irritating.
That's
Primus. Did you hear Primus?
Yeah. Here it is, Emperor Atheist, debunking William Lane Craig with 20 plus years of PhD research in one 20-minute video.
Basically, William Lane Craig has added to today. It's still a cosmological argument to trying to prove the existence of this God. But the premise is simple, and it's not really something that you need to hurt your brain over. And it could, because a lot of people always say, man, these philosophical arguments for God. And I always have to point out to people, and this is the main thing that I keep explaining to people, even atheists, an argument, I don't care how good argument, and I always say this, and I've said this in my prior videos, I don't care how good an argument is, an argument in and of itself is not evidence, and it proves a damn thing.
Whoa, time out.
Does he know what natural theology is?
Please give me.
What?
This is
Probably not.
Joke.
I need Tylenol, man.
I'll go last, but everyone can say their thing, and then I'll go last.
No, you just go. Just go.
Okay.
Okay, I would be curious on what if an argument's not what I want to know his definition of evidence. So if Emperor Atheist, if you see this, please define what you mean by evidence there.
All right. So far, that's 4 errors.
Well, okay. So basically, evidence is going to have to be, no matter how the definition of evidence is data that makes something more probable than it would have otherwise been. And with regards to the Kalam cosmological argument, yes, we are forming it as a deductive argument in order to clearly flesh out its premises, but the evidence is the origin of the universe. The beginning of the universe is the evidence. And what does that better fit, naturalism or deism or theism?
Deism.
Yeah, and I mean, I should add that you can't prove the existence of God. Proof is only in mathematics, right? So
Right.
Our that's natural theology it's not trying to prove God. It's just showing.
And even in something like an ontological argument, the possibility of the existence of God is still a probabilistic question.
Yeah, the Kalam is basically taking the evidence, putting it into a syllogism, and it's not hard to understand.
Yeah.
Right.
Wait, and this guy's supposed to, I mean, he told me, I'll if anyone comments, I'll happily, pull it up. He specifically told me, I showed Tim. He says he has a degree in theology and philosophy.
I don't know.
I just know.
I'm not gonna argue that, but
Aquinas?
Like,
who's this Aquinas?
It's equal to a hypothesis, and I have to keep reiterating this because people think that arguments, maybe you win an argument, or whatever you consider to be winning an argument, on whose part, on whoever's part it is, doesn't mean that you actually brought evidence and proved your point. So all of these arguments you have the cosmological argument, you have the ontological, you have the tag argument or the teleological argument for God. You have
the tag is not the teleological argument.
I was gonna let that slide, but yeah.
I'm not. I don't think I'm letting anything slide now.
Hey, wait. How far is this into the video?
We're 2 minutes and 53 seconds. 2 minutes.
3 seconds.
Not
It's
even 3 minutes.
gotten 5 errors.
Oh boy.
At least.
All right. I think we should just save the ripping apart for the actual, so-called debunking.
Go for it.
Skip ahead a little bit.
The moral argument, and I just did a video for those who haven't seen that video, debunking the moral argument. And I'm not the only one who's done this. This has been done so many times.
Right.
Even scientists. I mean, people like Isaac Newton and other scientists who still had the belief in the deity. I think in today's world they wouldn't be. I don't believe they would be theists in today's world because of our advancement. I mean, we've also progressed in certain ways too, but we've also, as far as technology and information, researching things, I think we've advanced a lot. And I think a lot of those intellectuals
the stupid.
believing in this Christian stuff.
Debunk word salad.
A lot of the things that religion teaches, especially the Abrahamic religion, I just don't believe they would be into it.
Can you pause for a second? Can you do that? I mean, this whole idea that ancient people, that people before our modern technological age were stupid or something is just, insulting.
Right.
It's condescending to brilliant thinkers.
Right, and we're talking people who co-founded calculus.
We're talking about literal scientists who are like we're talking about Isaac Newton, who is probably the greatest scientist of all time, and you're saying that he wouldn't be a theist now because of what? What is there in observational science that today that there wasn't at that time that points against the existence of God?
Oh boy. I wouldn't make us sit through this if I knew where he actually like had the objections at. So
yeah.
The first major three premises.
Finally.
Premises of this cosmological argument. Number one, everything, and this is the main thing. Everything that begins to exist must have a cause. Okay, that's the first premise. They believe that this argument starts off that everything that begins to exist, or that begun to exist, or whatever, had a cause. Something caused it to exist. And second premise is that, well, the universe began to exist. Second premise. Third premise is, if the universe has a cause, then that cause must be God.
No.
Nope.
No, that's not part of the art. No.
Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe.
Whoa! Did he say the cause of the universe must be God?
That sounds
what he
like
said.
Argument, not the.
He said that was one of the premises.
Okay, error number 6. That's the Leibniz.
No, what premise did he say that was?
He said that was premise 3. He said that was either 3 or 4 or something.
No, that's
Okay,
like
no.
the Leibnizian contingency argument and whatever.
Yeah, he's confusing the two arguments, but
oh boy.
all right. We'll give him that. Just continue.
All right, I'll let that slide.
I would also prefer to say that whatever begins to exist has a cause, but that's semantics. That's fine.
Well, but like I said, though, that's confusing the Kalam with the Leibniz, not the.
Oh yeah, the conclusion. Yeah.
Fifth premise: therefore God exists.
What? No, there's no fifth. Wait.
What is it? There is no.
premise.
Okay, hold on.
Does he think that? Does he think that the Leibniz? That must be it, right? He's confusing the two.
Yeah.
I think he's actually. Well, that might be why it's called the cosmological argument, because Leibnizian cosmological.
But those are two entirely different arguments.
I don't know.
Right, and he's referencing. Earlier he said this is the argument that Craig has championed, so he's clearly talking about the Kalam. So
right, but then he's bringing in two more premises. Right. Like you can't just splice the Leibnizian argument with the Kalam and then say it's illogical, because of course it's illogical if you're putting together two different arguments.
Right, and I'm on reasonablefaith.org right now, and there's an article called "In Defense of the Kalam Cosmological Argument," in which William Lane Craig formulated as he would. Premise 1: whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2: the universe began to exist. Premise 3: therefore the universe has a cause. So I'm not really sure where he's getting. He has to be confusing Leibnizian contingency argument. He has to.
Or he thinks that they're the same thing, and he's just putting them together.
Dude,
right.
Same thing. They do argue the same thing, but they argue differently.
Right, they're entirely different premises.
7. How far are we into it now? That's 7.
We're 5 minutes. I don't even think we should watch all 20 minutes. We should probably move on to something at least a little bit more.
Let's see what his objections are, and then
we're just getting the objections out of the way, then moving on to something else.
Now, I just broke these premises down. Mm-hmm. I gave it 5 premises, but the basic 3 premises are:
there we go.
Everything begins to exist. Universe begins to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. But this.
Wait. So why would he need to break it? Why would he need 5 premises if 3 seconds later he's going to say the 3 premises of the argument? Oh boy.
Maybe he thinks he's helping us out or something. I don't know.
I mean.
Okay, maybe I don't know. Maybe we jumped the gun. I don't know, but we'll see.
I think William Lane Craig actually needed some help.
And I'm basically mixing both arguments. The original cosmological argument up with William Lane Craig, more popular modern argument today with Kalam cosmological argument. But this is the trick to this whole thing. In the first premise of both arguments, everything begins to exist must have a cause. Thing that they do, they don't include their God into this cause.
Oh,
here we go.
What did he say? Pause that. What did he say?
They don't include the God.
He says the trick is for the first premise, they don't bring their God into it.
Error number 9.
You want me to go? Should I just I'll rip this one apart first.
Somebody give it a crash course, please.
God, we're using cumulative case when using these arguments.
This is crazy, dude. This guy hasn't even been talking for 5 minutes, and he's already made 9 mistakes.
Yeah. Number 2, God is a necessary being. It means eternal.
If God, didn't this guy say that God wasn't contingent?
Yeah. All right. And also, one of the comments we had, he says S5 shows that God is not contingent, therefore he can't exist. This is the logic we're working with. This is what we're working with.
Okay, so he says that God isn't contingent and God is necessary. So if he's saying that God is that God, if he exists, would be necessary, that if he exists, he would exist in every possible world. Like,
okay, let's just go ahead and clear
that. By definition, there is no beginning to a necessary being because a necessary being always exists.
Right, and oh boy.
Actually,
on a layman's level,
is after this.
The premise doesn't apply to God. God is a timeless, transcendent being. Timeless, hence we're timeless. He doesn't.
It begins to exist.
Right.
Now, and the reason they don't do this, they make this God uncause, and they have to do this.
Pause it.
God is whoa.
Okay, so again, he uses a particular. He's this God. Is he confusing that somehow the Kalam is specific Christian theology? Because if so, that's completely false. Again, this is generic theology or generic theism that this is trying to give a probability argument for.
So if God is, we're not even talking about, like, if we go beyond the argument, God is obviously going to be defined as a timeless, unmoved mover of some sort. I mean, that was the definition of God way before the Kalam. It's not like we're ad hoc coming up with this definition of God to fit this argument.
They have to make their God, their personal God, by the way, with their
No, we don't.
No.
Cumulative case.
Just let him go. Oh.
Yeah, keep going.
Whatever God. They have to make the God that they believe in this uncause. You know what I mean by this uncause cause? That God didn't begin to exist never. He was just here. This is where the argument goes straight to hell. Exist. And you just throw it in. Because first and foremost, the thing about it, and the first thing is when you say everything begins to exist as a cause, why do you not, and I'm talking to you Christian apologists and scholars and those who believe this, so why do you not negate God within the everything?
Because he didn't begin to exist.
The premise says that everything that begins to exist has a cause.
Not everything.
Immediately, after you utter those words, immediately God becomes, that premise does not apply to God. Because since the history of ever, that humans ever had the ability to think, God meant timeless. I mean, as far as Christian theology, or as far as
Judeo-Christian theology. And God has always been seen as, and if God exists, he is not a contingent being. It's not like if God exists, then God, if God exists and he is all powerful, then God couldn't be gone. He couldn't not exist. I mean, isn't that obvious?
This isn't like Greek mythology in which like Zeus and Athena were birthed from, the cosmic remnants of the universe. This is a being in which created all that we know and see and observe today. This is
exactly. It's like he can. So it's like this is actually two separate errors. He misrepresents the Kalam argument, and he misrepresents the Christian conception of God. So that's
that's actually, I hate to harp on this, but the Kalam is not a specific God-based argument. This is a generic argument for theism in the general sense. So
it does argue for a personal theism,
right?
Look at this comment right here.
Not specifically Christianity.
You are bringing it. You are educating all of us. I think you're smart. No, I don't think so. Like if this is education to you, then oh boy. like 50, like, this is no intellectual substance.
Everything that began to exist had a cause. Then what makes God not having a cause? What did God? Why is it not a good
Okay,
question?
you don't need to repeat yourselves.
Principle of sufficient reason. He doesn't. I don't even think he knows what that is. Everything has an explanation of its existence. God's explanation would be the necessity of its own nature. I don't think we should stop on any more points, in least regards to what caused God.
For us to say, if everything had a cause in the beginning, if everything that began to exist had a cause, then what caused God to exist? But
Whoever said that God began to exist? Who that defend this argument has ever said everything that exists has a cause? Who has said it? Has Craig said that?
Let me ask you this, Emperor Atheist. Who created logic? Nobody. Can't create logic because in order to
a good example. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like you can't create logic because you'd have to use logic. So in trying to create logic, you'd be arguing.
It's a necessary. It's something that's necessary. The laws of logic would be something that'd be necessary.
Exactly. In other words, it's not a contingent. There are three types of things. There are contradictory items which do not exist because they contradict their own nature, like a square circle or a circular triangle. There are contingent beings, meaning their existence relies on an
external
pre-existent entity. And a necessary entity is one that never had a beginning whose existence does not rely on the existence of another. So the thing is, God's nature is a necessary entity, not a contingent. So you're confusing Greek mythological gods, which would be contingent beings, with a necessary God. So this is error number 12. And where are we at?
7 minutes.
12 errors in 7 minutes. This is ridiculous. But by the way, guys, I probably should go in 20 minutes, though, because I got to get ready for work.
All right, let's
see if we can't finish this video.
I think we should just do 3 more minutes. That's about all I can take for now.
Because this is ridiculous.
I mean, I'm sure he'll rant more at the end, so there's probably not much more than we'll see if he says anything about premise 2 then, because that's what he has to say about premise 1.
If he just keeps repeating himself here, I think we should just skip that a little bit. The Christian apologists and scholars who weave this argument and try to use this argument to try to make sense of the existence of some deity that they want to believe in, this personal God of the Bible. They say that, well, God was not into everything. Uncaused cause, and some of you, I'm sure you're familiar with these different things, the unmovable mover. In other words, God was just here. This is something they can't explain. Of course, no evidence. So we're just going to deal with arguments. We've already established from the beginning of this video, no evidence has ever been given for this damn imaginary God. So the argument in and of itself is just an argument. It's not possible. But we're going to tackle these hypotheses, and we're going to show you how much sense even that hypothesis doesn't make. It's a weak hypothesis. It's a weak argument. So the thing that I'm saying is, they can never answer the question. And this is the question you need to ask these people when they come to you with these arguments, and you need to recognize arguments, whether it's the moral argument of God, dealing with objective morality and objective moral views, or is this the universe? The first thing they come tell you, well, the moon and the stars and the universe is here. So how did it get here? And this is the thing about it. When they ask me that, I totally agree with the theists and the Christian apologists when they say that the universe began to exist. Yes, I believe. Do I believe that the universe had a cause? Yes, I do.
Okay, stop. So does he disagree with the first premise? Does he disagree with the first premise? All he said is, well, where's God in that? The thing is, it is common in things like quantum physics. You don't need to know the explanation of something to
consider it to be the best explanation.
Right.
I think if I caught it right, I think he's actually about to say, I think the universe has a cause.
Dude,
yeah, he did say that.
Cause when they ask me that, I totally agree with the theists and the Christian apologists when they say that the universe began to exist. Yes, I believe. Do I believe that the universe had a cause? Yes, I do.
So, okay, oh boy, I think we should just leave it at that. Honestly,
Well, let's see if
unless you guys
I'm
want to keep.
curious of what his idea of cause. What is his idea of the cause of the universe?
I mean, I doubt he even knows what a quantum vacuum or a quantum fluctuation is. So
you'll probably say Lawrence Krauss said something smart.
yeah, I'm not holding my breath on anything.
I'm not
Oh boy.
Rouse. I'll never forget that time when he lied about Alexander Vilenkin and
Ugh.
Yeah, that was funny. That was awesome.
caught Krauss in a lie.
Well, that cause must be
Well,
God.
yeah, this is Mr.
It doesn't have to be God. And see, this is the thing. As an atheist and as a student of science,
A student of science.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, maybe so, but his philosophy is absolute. It's just terrible. So let's see his science.
we don't have to know everything. See, that's the thing. That's the thing about it.
Pause it. Let's go with that. We don't have to know everything. Fantastic. What if the theist just said, we don't know what caused God?
Yeah, we don't have to. All right, he's right in a sense. We don't have to know everything, but it's not wrong to postulate. Think of questions.
I mean, they thought he wanted science. Doesn't he want to know things? Like, oh, okay.
Like the age-old question. Nothing.
Yeah.
We do have much evidence for the Big Bang, and the theory, the model that we have, the theoretical model that we have for the Big Bang, makes more sense than anything else out there as far as how our universe.
How much do you want to bet he didn't even know the Big Bang model was the universe from a hot, dense state to its expansion?
Right. I'm curious if he takes. So he's. Let me get this straight. He believes that in the the universe had a beginning. Either whether that's like sort of like the Hawking Hartle model or whether it's just a standard singularity model. But
Well, he seems to just think it's a standard singularity model.
wow.
Came to be
Okay,
about.
then carry on.
It makes more sense than anything. Now, you asked the question, well, what caused it? What caused it? There's a lot of different answers, a lot of different theories of what caused the Big Bang or what was before.
What about theism?
People asked. Well,
Right. I'm assuming he's probably going to go multiverse on us, but I don't know.
Maybe.
Oof.
Let's see what we gotta say.
I'm actually interested now. Keep going.
well, Emperor Atheist, what do you think was here before the Big Bang? Well, as far as I know, I don't know. I have no idea what was here before the Big Bang.
So why are you entirely ruling out God?
See,
I don't know,
right.
but we know it's not God.
okay, so here's.
So yeah,
Oh,
I'm gonna
boy.
let Spartan.
Yeah, what's up?
I'm gonna bring in a quote here from Luke Muehlhauser of Common Sense Atheism,
Go for it.
and I think this is a really good quote right here.
Are you screen sharing it?
I can. Just give me a second here. Okay, screen share.
oh man. So
Screen.
his argument is, I don't know what caused the universe,
But it's definitely not God.
but it's not God because who calls God? That's what I'm hearing right now. And okay, all right.
Yep, and
Okay.
and this is gonna show the big. Everybody see it?
Yeah,
All right. I guess I'll read it.
yeah. I can
So
kind of.
basically, when the atheist says, "What caused God?" I guess I could zoom it a little bit. I don't know. Hello?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Let me be. Oh, no, wrong. The atheist has not offered a strong objection. Let me be clear. I agree that God did it is generally a terrible explanation for complexity or, well, pretty much anything. God did it does generally fail as an explanation. But it does not merely fail because the theist has no explanation for God. That is not the problem with offering God did it as an explanation. So then he goes into what the problem is of offering God did it as an explanation. But let's go back to where it supports their point. I mean, you can read the other part if you want, but let's go on to right here. This would immediately lead to an infinite regress of explanations. We would need to have an explanation of the explanation and an explanation of the explanation of the explanation onto infinity. And thus, we would never be able to explain everything, anything. Moreover, this is not how science works. Examples from physics are most obvious. In order to explain certain quantum phenomena, scientists have posited the existence of dozens of invisible particles with very particular properties that yield predictable results. These have been some of the most successful explanations in all of scientific history, yielding the most accurate experimental results we have ever achieved. And yet we have no explanation whatsoever for the particles that we have offered as explanations for the quantum phenomena. So, okay, okay.
All right. That was a good quote, though.
So basically, yeah.
It's like sweet, and that came from an atheist thinker.
Yeah, yeah, because it's just not a good It's not a good objection because you're not actually doing anything to the argument.
And this, I mean, he's not even a thinker, so I think we've established that in the first 2 minutes of the video.
I do know this. Through proven scientific testing and hundreds of years of evidence and scientific proof, energy, we have no history of energy beginning. So, was energy here before the Big Bang?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it was. Where did energy and radiation come from? I have no idea. Did energy and radiation have a cause? I don't know.
So he's essentially saying that the universe is that sounds more of like a Hartle-Hawking thing then.
Yeah.
Right.
But this is the big hole for believers and Christians. They say they don't need to speak about energy or radiation. Of course, they can't go that far. But they say that God just put it into their argument, created into their argument. They say that God was not caused to exist. So in other words, he never began to exist, or it never began to exist. Now, can they prove this? No, they can't. So
okay, pause. So now we have to get into, I guess, the conclusion of the argument that what can we say about the cause of the universe from the Kalam?
Yeah.
So basically, given that that the Big Bang was the beginning of the universe, as this guy said.
He's ridiculous. Honestly, there's another problem with what he says. There are lots of things out there that cannot necessarily be proved, but that doesn't mean therefore it's not rational to accept. Like we can't 100% prove that there are other minds other than ours, but does that mean it's not rational?
Right, or we can't.
No,
we
but
can't
this
prove
guy
that
is
the
not
class wasn't created 5 minutes ago.
We can't prove that the external world is real, but that doesn't mean we can't. Well, it does go with the problem of hard solipsism, but which I'm not saying I am a solipsist, but the point is, if we put hard solipsism into the picture, it can sometimes be tough to figure out. But however, the point is, it's like, with that being the case, even if we can't prove that the external world is real, that doesn't mean it's not rational to believe it's there. We can't really prove right now that I'm not a robot right now talking, but that doesn't mean it's not rational to think that I'm not a robot.
It's about the preponderance of the evidence.
Exactly, because you can't see my face and you can't see me. So it's like you can't prove that I'm not a robot, but that doesn't mean therefore.
Well, even if we could see it, we could be experiencing a hallucination. We could posit all sorts of things.
Right. We could be some type of brain in a vat being stimulated by some cosmic scientist or something like that to believe this external world exists.
But in the absence of any defeaters of our knowledge that we really do exist.
Right. And the same applies to moral truths.
Yeah.
It says William of Ockham would say the simplest explanation is the best explanation.
Correct.
And in this case, the simplest explanation is that I am not a robot.
Exactly.
Wait, and before we get back to the video,
So yeah, that's all.
I'll go for it.
That's what he's doesn't seem to understand. Because you can't prove it doesn't mean it's not rational to accept.
And I was gonna say that since at this point he's basically saying that we don't know what caused the universe, from the Kalam we can actually get to a personal transcendent cause, because if the Big Bang was the beginning of the universe, like he says, that it's got to be spaceless and timeless, and extremely powerful, immaterial, and then you've only got minds and numbers, and numbers can't cause anything. So you've got
I don't understand. If he
and as far as
if he
don't exist outside the mind.
correct. And if he's going with the standard Big Bang model, then and he's not postulating multiverse, then it seems to me that he is intellectually
either that or he's got to bite the bullet that the universe just came from nothing.
Yeah, but he has to go with the radical idea that we're talking nothing as an absence of being of the universe.
Yeah.
So,
and that's essentially what Quentin Smith has come to. That, yeah, we've just got to accept absurd things at some point, and then nothing caused the universe.
Let's get back.
Okay.
Though, I got one soon.
Let's see if he has anything more to say.
The argument is standing on his own is straight bullshit. So, in hindsight, I could say the same thing when using this premise, and I want y'all to follow me on this. If I say everything that begins to exist, this is the cosmological or Kalam cosmological argument. Everything that begins to exist has a cause, right? Universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause, right? This is an argument bundled up. So the third premise, which I took early in this video, I gave it 5 premises. I'm just going to deal with the 3. So in other words, the universe began to exist, therefore it has a cause. The universe exists. Okay, the cause. So what is that cause? Basically, they're saying that the universe, everything that began to exist had a cause. So what was that cause? They're saying that cause is God. Okay, they have no way of proving that. So my example of this.
You just said that.
I'm going to give a small earthly example, as I say, a terrestrial example. I can easily say that. Let me come up with something. Okay, I got it. Everything in Walmart has a price, right? Everything in Walmart has a price. Okay, but electricity is not included in those things that has a price in Walmart. Okay, that's my second
What?
What is going on?
Oh boy.
Okay, this is
that's not even analogous. What is he? What does
price at Walmart have to do with electricity, let alone the universe?
Okay, so wait. Let's see if
comparison. There's no parallel.
Let's see if we can try to see what he's doing. Like,
weak analogy.
I can't.
It has no price. Therefore, I don't have to pay my light.
Because therefore, electricity has no price. Therefore, you have to pay an electricity bill.
Okay, so if electricity is God, and Walmart is everything.
No, here's what it was.
Yeah.
Everything in Walmart has a price. Here, I'll run it back a little bit.
He goes, everything in Walmart has a price.
I don't need to.
Electricity is also.
Okay.
Everything in Walmart has a price. Electricity is in Walmart. Therefore, my electricity at home does not have a price. Is what he just said.
Okay, so that's not analogous to the Kalam though.
Your electricity at home has nothing to do with electricity at Walmart.
I would even go as far as to say that this is nothing more than a red herring.
I'll go farther than that and say it's nonsense.
Yeah, it's only nonsense, but it's irrelevant, even if we accept it.
Yeah, the whole thing at home, yeah. Okay, so but if I try and retranslate that back into what he thinks the Kalam is, so Walmart in this case is the universe, right?
I guess, yeah.
And the electricity is God? Or something?
I guess so. I'm
Okay.
just baffled, honestly.
Yeah.
So if Walmart, so if the universe has a cause,
There's no compare. He literally what he did. He took an attribute of the stuff in Walmart, namely them having a price, and applied it to electricity.
I feel like
So essentially,
I feel like
he's trying to put that on a Kalam.
He's just grasping
Yeah.
straws. I really don't think this part is really worth discussing.
Yeah. But so if he's trying to, I think what he might be trying to do, I'm not sure, but he might be trying to say that the Kalam therefore commits the fallacy of composition.
What?
Maybe, or like trying to assign, like for instance, the only way I can see you go with like saying, since he assigned one attribute to attributes of stuff in Walmart to electricity, he could say maybe because the stuff in the universe is temporal.
Right. I guess he must think that we're just arbitrarily defining God as uncaused, but that's not what we're doing.
I think we're giving more depth than he meant it to be. Maybe
it's not included in those things that has a price in Walmart. Okay, that's my second premise. The third premise, therefore, electricity has no price. Therefore, I don't have to pay my light bills.
Well, yeah, electricity has a price because you buy stuff that contains electricity.
Okay, that's not either valid or sound. Like,
and it's a non-sequitur.
There's no comparison.
I mean, if he's trying to make a counter argument, this is like the worst counter argument you could come up with.
Yeah.
We thought who created God was bad. This is a whole new level.
Let's say his little syllogism was sound. Okay, well, he still hasn't dealt with the universe having a timeless, spaceless, immaterial cause. I mean,
right.
If you're saying that everything in the universe, right? Everything in the universe has a cause. The universe began to exist, so it has a cause. So that cause must be God. I said the same thing about electricity. I don't have to pay my light bill because this light bill is not within the sale markets or products of Walmart. So
I mean, technically, you are buying the electricity because the electricity is contained in the buying.
This is ridiculous, but
why are we even talking about this little analogy right here? Honestly,
what is assigning attributes of something to another thing have anything to do with that thing having a cause or the cause? What?
There's no causal connection to anything here.
Right.
Therefore, I don't have to pay my light bill because Walmart don't sell electricity. So what do I need to pay it for? It's just a basic dodo bird thinking that you Christian apologists weave into these.
Oh wow! Okay.
He caught us.
That is so condescending
and his electricity example is totally not dodo bird thinking or anything, right? That's
right.
The fact that he's trying to say Spy Daddy and he uses dodo bird, I think enough is said.
Yeah. All right. Hey, I gotta get going though. I gotta get to work, so I'll see you guys later. And thanks for having me here.
All right, see you, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
No way that you can just place God, because first of all, we have no knowledge of this God. So you're going to automatically make God this, as I said before, this uncaused cause. Where did you even get the premise or the foundation to even make God an uncaused cause? Where? From your Bible? That won't work. We can't use your Bible. Your Bible doesn't make God an uncaused cause. It doesn't explain where God came from. So this is...
How does he define God?
But the implications of the Kalam, if the universe did have a beginning, strictly, since the theory of relativity obviously tethers space, time, and matter together, obviously the cause of the universe would be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. So, okay, I don't understand.
It holds that these Christian apologists use and they try to weave. And I want y'all to go back and actually just look at the cosmological argument. And basically, a lot of you probably going to laugh at it if you're not familiar with it. You're going to basically laugh at it. You want to see how stupid it is.
How does it have 0 dislikes? I just noticed that.
Yeah, I mean, I might.
What in the world is wrong with the atheist community?
Read this comment right here. You are bringing it. You are educating all of us. I think you're smart.
Whoa, go back to the comment. Someone was talking about virtual particles right below that. Can you pull that up again?
Yeah. Oh boy. Everything that begins has a cause. Not only do you get special pleading argument for make your God, how do they explain?
Okay, that's automatically a straw man. The point of the Kalam is not to prove any specific God. The point of the Kalam is just to prove theism in general. I mean, that's exactly. Straw man. The total straw man.
Correct. Okay.
And what's the second?
Wait, what did he say about the universe having a cause? What was his argument against premise 3?
The universe has a cause. We don't know that, and as it follows,
as the first 2 premises fail.
Wait, he said since.
All right, basically he's saying since the first 2 premises fail, then we can.
Which of the first 2 premises fail?
Yeah. He didn't.
He failed on
he's
virtual
tr-
particles. The universe began.
Right, is virtual particle okay?
The Big Bang states the universe expanded from a single point. It does not explain the origin of that point.
Or he's saying so for premise 2, he's saying that we can only go back to Planck time.
Yeah, but all right, that's a reasonable point. But I mean, at least most scientists would at least agree that the universe did begin to exist. I guess we'll just continue with the video.
Yeah.
I mean, his first premise failed anyway, so.
How much left do we have? Oh God, 7 minutes.
I mean, we can cut it short if you want, honestly.
Yeah.
I think we're. If anybody really want to finish this,
All right. So what I'm thinking is maybe we could what I'm thinking is do some objections to certain arguments. Like, let's do some videos on fine tuning, ontological.
let's start with the ontological then, because
All right.
I'm sick of holding this stupid page open of this book.
I got one. Oh, this one's a beauty.
Oh God. TMM.
No. Oh, good.
No, I'm pulling it up.
Oh, good.
This one.
This will be
We'll start.
fun.
We go.
A lot of people have criticized the video that I made on the ontological argument because I
it was
addressed
terrible.
Anselm's version of it rather than the version favored by Alvin Plantinga and William Lane Craig. For those of you who haven't seen that video, check it out so you know what I'm talking about. I'll put an annotation, or if annotations aren't working, I'll put a link in the box. A criticism that I repeatedly got was that William Lane Craig's version of the argument doesn't simply add existence to the definition of God. My detractors argue that William Lane Craig doesn't say that existing is part of what it means to be the greatest conceivable being. Well, let's listen to what exactly Craig says.
If a being of that nature exists in even one possible world, then it exists in all of them, because that's part of what it means to be the greatest conceivable being.
Can you say that again, Billy?
Because that's part of what it means to be the greatest conceivable being.
Existing in all possible worlds is part of what it means to be the greatest conceivable being. He does in fact say that existence is part of, or at the very least implied by, the very definition of God. So even Craig's version of the ontological argument tries to commit the same silly trick of simply defining God into existence. Now you may be able to formulate.
No. It doesn't. It just argues that it's possible. It doesn't. That's not what the ontological argument does. All it does is just argue that it's possible that God exists, and therefore, through modal logic, we can conclude, that it's more logical that God exists rather than him not existing. He's already presented a straw man here.
So which premise does he deny? I mean, he's either got to say that it's not possible that God exists,
He would have to show that there's a logical contradiction in
right.
God exists in order for this argument to fail. So,
right. So he either has to do that, or he has to deny S5, which is just
basically. All right, we'll play it back.
Because that's the only thing you can do with the ontological argument. That's all you can do.
Does in fact say that existence is part of, or at the very least implied by, the very definition of God. So even Craig's version of the ontological argument tries to commit the same silly trick of simply defining God into existence. Now you may be able to formulate a concept of God that requires you to think of God as existing, but whether you think of God as existing has nothing to do with whether God actually exists. All ontological arguments make the same mistake. Now Craig's version of the argument does add the caveat that if it is possible for God to exist, then God does exist. In this formulation, God's existence.
Yeah, because it's following basic S5 modal logic. That's.
I mean, and if you formulate it into a way like Peter Williams put it into, you're putting it into a deductive form, and you're not committing any sort of circular reasoning because you're putting it into a valid form. That premise 1, if it is possible that God exists, then God exists. 2. It is possible that God exists, therefore God exists. So, I mean, I guess essentially he's denying the first premise that if it is possible that God exists, then God exists. So there he would either have to dispute S5 or say that God is contingent, which is contrary to the classical definition of God, which would be, and we get back into the same thing like we were talking about before, that God is obviously a necessary being.
Exactly.
is at least contingent upon God's existence being possible. Without that, the argument is simply a meaningless tautology. But even with this caveat, the argument still tries to conjure God into existence using only a definition, and it still fails. Craig in Plantinga's version of the argument says that a maximally great being, if it exists in any possible world, it exists in all possible worlds. What he means when he says possible worlds is conceivable scenarios. If a maximally great being exists in one conceivable scenario, it exists in all conceivable scenarios, which includes your conception of reality. Maximal greatness has to exist in all conceivable scenarios.
Hey, our conception of reality. I don't. Is that what he?
No.
I think he's.
I think he meant like, exist in the actual world. I think that's what he meant to say.
Oh, okay. Okay.
This guy's supposed to be like a philosophy major, apparently.
In one or a few hypothetical scenarios, it would not be maximally great. To be maximally great, something must, by definition, exist in all conceivable scenarios. So if you say,
or not exist in all scenarios.
I mean, I really don't get what's so hard for the people.
Either God exists in all possible worlds or God exists in no possible worlds.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, isn't that obvious?
Yeah.
If God is indeed a necessary being, which it's hard to argue that he's not. It seems like it's right there.
Sounds like a bunch of words, Sally.
Yeah.
possible for maximal greatness to exist, you are placing it in a conceivable scenario. Since if you place it in one hypothetical scenario, you are placing it in all conceivable scenarios, then to say that maximal greatness is possible is equivalent to saying that maximal greatness is actual. If you accept this argument and you accept that maximal greatness is possible, it requires you to think of maximal greatness, and by extension God, as existing not just in hypothetical conceptions of reality, but also in your conception of actual reality. The problem is that your conception of actual reality is still just a conception. It is not reality itself. That's why the real core argument...
Okay. I don't...
That's his objection to the ontological argument.
I'm
sorry, hold on. What did he say? Can you? I didn't catch that.
Yeah, you're gonna have to play that again.
I think it started from right here.
Conceptions of reality, but also when
right here.
This is actual. If you accept this argument and you accept that maximal greatness is possible, it requires you to think of maximal greatness, and by extension God, as existing not just in hypothetical conceptions of reality, but also in your conception of actual reality. The problem is that your conception of actual reality is still just a conception. It is not reality itself. That's why the real core argument doesn't work, and that's why, for the same reason, none of the ontological arguments works.
Okay, I'm curious as what does he mean by our conception of reality? Why not just say God exists in a possible world? Yeah, okay. Why is he not saying, like, it's typically phraseology that's used such that is, if he's possible in a possible world, then he exists in the actual world. That
right?
I'm not.
I don't see his objection. I don't see an objection to the argument at all, other than his whole silly defining God existence straw man.
I mean, I largely agreed with what he said. He basically just defined an ontological argument, and then he just threw that in at the end. And...
Because, I mean, once again, we're talking about TMM. This guy is not...
Messianic moron. That's what I call him.
Yeah.
I would click on that, but no, not worth the time.
How are you doing that? I don't know.
Or you just want to move on to fine tuning?
Yeah, let's do fine tuning.
Yeah, fine tuning sounds
one
good.
of the arguments that I still accept.
There's one down here, right here.
Is this still TMM?
Yeah.
At least his videos are short.
The argument from fine-tuning basically says that the number of different properties and variables and constants that the universe could have is so vast that the likelihood that the universe would have exactly the right properties for life is extremely small. So small that it is best explained by the existence of some conscious entity that fine-tuned the universe specifically for the existence of life. However, if this universe is just one of many universes, and there are enough universes in the multiverse to cover every single possible
stop it. Okay, yeah, But what fine-tune the multiverse? That's
You
just
still need
Right.
that's just bringing the
Right,
problem one step back. Like, yeah, you can say there's a multiverse,
Right.
but that violates Occam's razor on top of, okay, what fine-tune the multiverse? I mean,
Right, and with the multiverse, it's extremely more probable that we would get a Boltzmann brain that would fluctuate into existence and view its own small.
I mean, the only
that we
like
get
literally the only way you could escape that is if you say that the multiverse has an infinite number of universes, which again it violates Occam's razor. So the simplest.
Well, Sean Carroll wrote a paper. The only way I've seen Sean Carroll deal with this, and he somehow he uses the argument that quantum fluctuations aren't genuine events or something like that. I have to look at the paper again to quote him exactly, but unless he's going to use the argument like that, I fail to see how he can just postulate the multiverse and say, "Oh, that's it. That's fine tuning."
Yeah.
Furthermore, multiverse comes out of cosmic inflation, and cosmic inflation, you still have to have some particulars at the quantum inflation level in order to get this producing universe mechanism, if you will. So.
And the thing is that the multiverse here seems to be posited in order to explain the fine tuning, and that's not really how explanatory scope should work. And that we should basically be accepting hypotheses that
it's ad hoc, like they're just
right.
So they're trying to like
right.
Now I'm not saying the multiverse doesn't exist. I mean, I don't know, but to say that because the multiverse exists, it somehow avoids the inclusion is just that's ad hoc.
And being so vague by saying the multiverse, I mean, there's so many different multiverse models. What model are you talking about? Does that model require fine tuning?
Yeah,
itself?
I mean, you have the many worlds model, which is based on the many worlds interpretation, and then you have, I think there's a few others. You have the infinite multiverse, and then you have the finite multi. I mean, there's different models. So
yeah, and I would recommend if TMM ever watches this, just to check out Luke Barnes on the multiverse.
Yeah,
because he, as far as if you want to know a bit more about the cosmic inflation and how that requires some particulars, find him if you will. Then check him out.
To come flood this video though, so.
Oh, I'm done.
Then the existence of even the rarest universes becomes probable. Not only probable, but inevitable. However, William Lane Craig seems convinced that he's found a formulation of the fine-tuning argument that gets around the multiverse hypothesis. So let's have some lulls.
By far, most of the observable universes in a world ensemble would be worlds in which a single brain fluctuates into existence out of the vacuum and observes an otherwise empty world.
So what Craig seems to be saying is that universes in which a brain could spontaneously generate and observe an otherwise empty universe would be way more common than universes that look like ours. Now, I have absolutely no clue where he gets that idea, so I'm very skeptical about it.
What?
For the sake
pause.
He doesn't know anything about Boltzmann brain. Oh my goodness.
Even the likes of Sean Carroll himself said, yes, it's a problem for the multiverse hypothesis. I mean, the Boltzmann brain's been around since Boltzmann, the guy who we've coined the term because of his name. I mean, yeah. So, okay, continue.
Argument that he's right.
Thus, if our world were just a random member of a world ensemble, we ought to be having observations like that. Since we don't, that strongly disconfirms the world ensemble hypothesis. So chance is also not a good explanation. It follows that design is the best explanation of the fine-tuning universe.
He seems to be arguing here that because space brain universes are vastly more common than universes that look like this one, that it's vastly more likely for you as a conscious entity to find yourself in one of those universes rather than a universe.
No. He's misunderstanding Boltzmann brains. So he's saying that if Craig is articulating the argument that if there was a multiverse, that's what we should be expecting, not that we are in a multiverse and that we're just living in that one fine-tune. No.
The argument is that it's extremely more probable that this brain alone fluctuates into existence and observes, like you said, otherwise empty universe. So I'm not really sure where he's going with this, but continue.
Therefore, the fact that we do find ourselves in this universe cannot be explained by chance. It is better explained by a designer.
Okay, pause.
He's really strawmanning the argument here. Really.
Yeah. He goes on to say that therefore chance cannot be. That's not necessarily what he's saying. What he's saying is it's extremely less probable on naturalism that this happens.
Yeah, and it seems pretty ad hoc, his explanations. Wait, are you guys still there? Hello?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
The complete non sequitur, he also seems to be moving the goalpost here. This argument is no longer even an argument about the probability of the existence of this universe, as the standard formulation of the fine-tuning argument is. If the multiverse contains so many different universes that the existence of every possible universe becomes inevitable, then the existence of this universe is inevitable.
No. Oh my goodness. Go first, Jacob.
Okay, what he's saying is, okay, again, let me restate this Boltzmann brain problem. In our universe, we're seeing fine-tuning and order as far as our telescopes can see. What Craig is arguing that it is extremely more probable that this exists on theism, because on naturalism, the probability that we have this Boltzmann brain fluctuate into existence, view itself, and then view itself in an empty universe that is what's probable on naturalism. And he's saying that it's hard to let's see what I'm looking for here. Let's just say it's extremely more probable in theism that we find a universe that's probable.
Well, and I think that TMM is really fundamentally misunderstanding Boltzmann brains, because the Boltzmann brain argument is an argument against the existence of a multiverse.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Not that it is improbable for this universe to exist, but rather that it is improbable that we as conscious entities would find ourselves in this universe, given that we are vastly outnumbered by universes inhabited by space brains. He's arguing that it's vastly more likely that you would find yourself living as a space brain than living here on Earth.
If the multiverse exists, that's what Craig is saying. That if the multiverse exists, that's what we should be expecting.
Yeah, then we should find a Boltzmann brain, or we should be a Boltzmann brain. Not that. That's what he's arguing. So I think he like you said, Tim, he's misunderstanding Boltzmann brains.
In a universe in which every possible universe is accounted for, then even if you did find yourself in the apparently more probable circumstance of living as a space brain in one of these other universes, this universe would still inevitably exist. Since that's the case, why would it exist?
If the multiverse exists, he hasn't given any arguments for the multiverse.
Yeah,
or any model. He's just multiverse.
He hasn't given evidence for multiverse.
Right.
All possible universes exist, including this universe, a universe with an Earth inhabited by 7 billion people, then it is inevitable and unavoidable that at least 7 billion of all of the conscious entities in the entire multiverse would find themselves living in this universe. And that's the case regardless of how outnumbered we are by space brain universes. If this universe...
No. Oh my gosh. Craig is arguing that on naturalism, we should expect our universe, even our universe, to be inhabited by a Boltzmann brain. Not that we're just outnumbered by other space brains, but rather that this universe should be that way.
Yep. Does TMM understand? He doesn't understand any of this. I mean...
Yeah, and the multiverse, this is an argument against the multiverse. You can't say, okay, yeah, there's Boltzmann brains, and then there's a multiverse, too. This is an argument against the multiverse, not just...
And he hasn't given any arguments for any multiverse model. Like, he's just
right.
Like not all multiverse models are ad hoc, but the way he's proposing it is certainly is completely ad hoc. He's saying, "Oh, but there could be a multiverse." Like, you can't just say that there could be a multiverse.
Living in it must necessarily exist among all of the possible universes in the multiverse, then the fact that we are extraordinarily outnumbered by all of these other kinds of universes is completely irrelevant to the fact that this universe must still necessarily exist.
All right, that was
Wow.
terrible. He had one where he basically attacks IPs of IP's videos.
Oh God.
I think we should let Kyle put this part.
Well, I don't. Well, I mean, I don't know
but-
what he was responding to, but
It was the I think it was the God's hand was not forced video, where
Well,
IP replied to Dark Matter 2525.
yeah. I'm not really. I mean, I don't know about that.
It's fine. I guess we'll just have our share on this one.
A narrow range of properties in which life is possible, it is more likely that the universe was designed and fine-tuned by a god for the purpose of human existence than it is for our universe to have the properties it does simply by chance.
Go back to that other screen, and then let's make sure that what he's saying is right.
All right, the fine-tuning arguments.
I guess I can largely agree with that.
It's fine. Yep.
More likely that the universe was designed and fine-tuned by a god for the purpose of human existence than it is for our universe to have the properties it does simply by chance. Dark Antics, some time ago, made a video in which he pointed out an interesting flaw in the fine-tuning argument.
External restrictions cause the need for fine-tuning. God finally tuned the universe. Therefore, God is bound by external restrictions.
Okay, pause it. If God wanted to make it in a universe in which he could be discovered, in which he could have evidence for himself, because he knew that, unfortunately, there were people who do reject it on these grounds, he would make a universe in which there would be evidences that point to him. It doesn't mean that he's bound by these fine-tuning. It means that he was to be discovered by these fine-tuning.
Once again, now they're psychologizing the mind of God, that God has to. Who said that God has to work within the bounds of fine-tuning?
Right, this is just evidence.
That sounds like a naturalistic assumption.
Especially if he's a personal and loving God, he would show his precision and care for us by making the conditions just right for us.
Exactly, and Sean Carroll does this over and over again. And I think Sean Carroll's a brilliant guy, but he says that God doesn't need fine-tuning. Of course he doesn't. Discoverability is possible of him, then he's going to make a world that's fine-tuned to point to himself.
Conditions of the universe were slightly different, life would be impossible. Apologists who make this argument are being disingenuous, though, because they don't really believe this. If they believe that God is omnipotent, then they do not really believe that life is impossible under other conditions. God created life in the universe under any conditions. If life is possible under any other conditions, then you can't say that the universe is fine-tuned for life. To say that the universe is fine-tuned for this...
Oh my God.
But the fact that he really needs to watch Robin Collins and Luke Barnes.
Right. Oh,
like,
he's made his point. He doesn't make he doesn't make multiple points in a video. So
basically, it's kind of like he has the tactics of like Ken Ham, and he basically just repeats himself. A bunch of word salad.
Life's existence does imply that God is somehow not able to create life under other conditions. Inspiring Philosophy responded to this argument with this assertion.
Basically, the evidence of fine-tuning doesn't always entail external restrictions. A designer can also finely tune for personal preference or for personal reasons.
What IP seems to be saying is that the universe is fine-tuned for God's preferences rather than for life. This undermines the whole...
No, that was just he just said God can do this. He didn't say okay.
Yeah, he didn't say he had to do it. Like the fine-tuning argument is not an argument. Like even under deism, you could still say that God created life, but then didn't have any personal reason to do so. So this is a total straw man.
Yeah, that was
fine-tuning argument. If this is true, then you can't use the specificity of the universe's conditions as evidence that our universe is unlikely to exist by chance rather than design. If we have some idea what the necessary conditions for life are, it makes at least some sense to say that a universe with life is very unlikely to arise by chance if life is impossible in most other conceivable universes. However, if all the fine-tuning argument really says is, it is improbable for this universe to arise by chance because God's preferences are not not served by most other universes, then the argument is completely unfalsifiable. We don't know what God's preferences are. If we don't know what God's preferences are...
Stop.
Hey guys, hold on. So I'll be back in just a moment.
All right, you're fine.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought now. Okay, yeah, he's still going by this stupid assumption that God had to do it, like that we're saying that God had to do it that way. That doesn't make a whole. I mean, yeah, he's at this point he's repeating himself.
He's like being Kent Ham of atheism, basically. He's just repeating word salad.
It's a cumulative case for essentially Christian God, since they're Christian apologists, and they're obviously would be arguing for a personal God. And if the God is personal, he was going to leave signs of his existence. And this is probably one of the strongest signs. You know, the fact that if he cares and loves for us, he would show that.
Yeah. So it does go back to what the best explanation for the fine-tuning of the universe is. Is it naturalism or theism? And on naturalism, there doesn't seem to be any good explanation for the fine-tuning of the universe. While on theism, there are good reasons to expect that there are. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it's improbable that we should expect fine-tuning with the existence of God. Let's say it's at 0.1. That the probability that we should expect the fine-tuning on theism is about 0.1.
Mm-hmm.
On naturalism, it's so much more unlikely that it still constitutes very strong evidence for theism. I mean, on naturalism, the probability of the fine-tuning of the universe is incomprehensibly low. So it's still very strong evidence for theism.
Yeah, and it's almost like he's going straight, well, this is direct proof of God. But like you said, either way, it's still evident. The fine-tuning for us still points in the direction of theism, no matter what kind of philosophical lenses you put on it. I guess we'll just go on ahead.
A way to determine whether a universe with conditions that conform to those preferences is or is not likely to exist by chance rather than design. Also, if God made the universe this way simply because he preferred it this way, why wouldn't he prefer a more elegant and efficient universe than this one? IP cites William Lane Craig's response to this question.
Efficiency, ladies and gentlemen, is an important value only for someone with either limited time or limited resources, or both. God is not limited in time or resources. I think the problem is that he's thinking of God from the perspective of the engineer.
All right, I'm back.
But God is more like the artist. Or
You didn't miss anything.
So right now he's just going over efficiency and William Lane Craig's response.
Oh, I guess I did make the point that essentially TMM is attacking that the probability of the fine-tuning on theism is pretty low. But I said even if that's true, and the probability that we should expect fine-tuning is, let's just grant for the sake of argument that it's 1%. That has to be weighed on the probability of the fine-tuning on naturalism. And the fine-tuning, the probability of the fine-tuning on naturalism is so much lower.
Right, but how do you go about calculating that probability? Because it seems to me you'd have to have some type of way to tap in to see how much God wants to create a fine-tuned universe.
Right, I'm not saying that you can't, but even if you granted for the sake of argument that it's unlikely that that you can't think of any good reason to think that God would create a universe that would be fine-tuned. Still on naturalism,
it's still okay.
The probability is still much lower. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Gourmet chef who enjoys the delight of creating a beautiful universe. I don't think we can presume to tell God how he ought to create the universe.
I don't agree with this. I think efficiency has an aesthetic elegance that one could reasonably expect a perfect being to value. But aside from that, the whole God can create the universe any way he wants argument also renders assertions of fine-tuning to be meaningless. If God can create the universe any way he wants, then there's no way to distinguish a universe created by some quirky, artsy-fartsy god and one that is the way it is because of sloppy, unintelligent, naturally occurring phenomena. I find it odd that God would design the universe in a way that is completely indistinguishable from one that is not intelligently designed at all.
So basically, he's saying, if God, he's going off the assumption God doesn't exist, obviously. So he's saying if God were to exist, we couldn't tell the difference between an intelligently designed universe and one that's not. Oh,
you do it for any sort of other.
Wait, is he saying you can't tell if if God designed it to be fine tuned or just to be artsy? Is that what he's saying? Or am I misunderstanding?
He's saying, I think that.
But the conclusion is still the same. God created the universe. So what has he done?
So it seems that he's saying that if God can do whatever he wants, then there's no more reason we should expect a fine-tuned universe over a completely random universe.
Okay.
Which, once again, is... Okay, so I'm trying to understand where he's coming from here. So...
You want me to back it up?
No.
Yeah, I don't. We'd have to have. Maybe we could have him on one day for him to explain that, because I don't grasp it as well.
He doesn't do live discussions. Made a video about why he doesn't do live discussions.
Because people can make stuff up, right?
He says he won't do live discussions because people can make stuff up.
Okay, so I think that the thing is he doesn't understand the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life at all, because we're talking about things. We're talking about the initial laws of the universe that cause life to exist at all. So if all we have to do then is come up with some sort of reason for God to value a universe with what we see rather than something else, like a universe with life than a universe without life.
I really don't understand.
I didn't say that well, but so his objection seems to be that the probability of the fine-tuning on the hypothesis of theism is low. So all we have to show then is that there are good reasons to think that God would value a world in which there are human persons who can discover
right here is basically what he's saying. If God can create a universe any way he wants, and there's no way to distinguish a universe created by some quirky, artsy-fartsy God, and one is that a way is because of Slavians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which once again, all that's attacking is the probability of the fine-tuning on theism, which is still, even if you put it generally low, which I don't think that we should, because I think that if God exists, we should, like Craig says, that we should expect the universe to look the way it looks in terms of fine-tuning for life, over naturalism, in which we shouldn't expect a universe at all, and we shouldn't expect a universe that has life at all, or a universe. You see what I mean?
I got you.
All right, is there any other videos?
I'd like to see the one right there where it says why there's no proof of God.
Or there was this one video on the resurrection he made.
Ooh, boy.
I actually have that.
Oh yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. I like that idea.
Can you just wait a minute? I'll be right back.
All right, yeah. I'll go ahead and just go to the playlist, I think. Oh, Kyle, is it?
The one that you posted on Facebook?
Yeah. All right.
And I was I got hella mad. It was like, this guy's retarded or something.
Yeah.
Getting this to debunk.
Yeah.
we already debunked the ontology, that one. So
this one, I kid you not, all he does is say, "Would you rather believe he was raised from the dead or this?" It was so ad hoc, and I mean,
this is the first time I've ever been exposed to him.
Yes,
I'm not impressed.
Maybe we should do some. I know he made some videos on ideals, and we can go over those too.
Yeah,
That's like my field.
He's done like 3 videos. Yeah, but I guess here's what we'll do. We'll do this, some idealism videos, and then we can move on to some resurrection.
Okay.
Guys, guess we're waiting on Tim. He's still.
I'm back.
All right, there he is. Tim, you got your deal. Tim, for you, this will probably be worse than the Emperor Atheist.
Now, Dr. Atkins says, I know of no evidence that the resurrection did take place. But there are actually 3 established facts recognized by the majority of New Testament historians today, which I believe are best explained by the resurrection of Jesus.
Really? You believe the idea that a man rose from the dead is the best explanation for something? All right, what are these facts? Let's hear them.
Okay, pause.
Sunday, following his crucifixion, Jesus.
I mean, we see here he's a priori just automatically just ruled out.
Yeah,
okay, this is nonsense. This is nonsense.
Well, yeah, he's going to establish the prior of the resurrection is extremely low, which, I mean, fine, granted to him. Grant him the probability of the resurrection before looking at the evidence of 10 to the negative 40th. Like, just do it, because the evidence can overcome that prior probability. I don't think it's that low, given the character of Jesus, him predicting his death and resurrection, him being a miracle worker, the probability of theism, among other things.
Yeah, and Eric has joined us, so. Right. That's why he keeps full screening.
His tomb was discovered empty by a group of his women followers.
Okay, so you could explain that by saying that somebody removed the body from the tomb, or you could explain it by saying that somebody rose from the dead.
Pause. It's a cumulative case.
You want to go first?
Cumulative case. I'll go last all these times. Right. Everybody else say something, then I'll say something before we.
Sorry, I actually read this in the Jesus Inquest book the other day. The fact to say someone stole the body, clearly he doesn't know what was going on with the Romans at that time. It was reported that a Roman fell asleep before Jesus. He fell asleep while on guard, and after that he was tortured so badly, and he got killed. So after that, Roman soldiers were literally scared to fall asleep or not pay attention.
Right.
So, and the tomb was heavy, so I'll let you guys go now.
Okay, yeah.
This, I think he's failing to realize that you can't just throw out in a possible explanation. You're gonna have to provide first century evidence for this claim that you're making, and I think pretty sure the evidence we see the Jews saying that the disciples stole the body or something like that. They're saying this, but what does that imply? That implies the empty tomb. So I just don't see where he's going with this.
So I think we have to remember that this is a cumulative case, and that if we only had the empty tomb, of course one could explain it by body theft. We're not saying that just because the tomb was empty that therefore Jesus rose from the dead. We're saying that it is more likely that it provides evidence for the resurrection. That is, that the probability of the empty tomb on the resurrection is 1. It's 100%, and that the probability that we should expect an empty tomb on the hypothesis that Jesus did not rise from the dead is very, very low. But once again, that alone doesn't make a case for the resurrection. Of course, if it's just the fact that the tomb was empty, then a body theft or something like that would be possible.
Right. It's okay. Oh, I'm curious where he goes with it.
You think the idea that a man rose from the dead is the better of those two explanations? Or even need to make an argument for why that's retarded?
Fact number 2. Separate saw appearances of alive after his death. According to the prominent New Testament critic of Vanderbilt University, Ralph Lindemann, it may be taken as historically certain that the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. These appearances were witnessed not only by believers, but also by unbelievers, skeptics, and even enemies.
So you could explain that by saying, A, all of these people had an illusory or delusional experience, or B, a man rose from the dead, and B is seriously the explanation that you find to be more convincing.
Pause. Okay, so now we get to the appearances.
Right, and he's pulling out the hallucination theory. So again, if say we just had Paul experiences, or we just had one disciple.
Yeah, then we could say a hallucination, while unlikely, is still a better explanation than the resurrection.
Right, but when you have evidence, or the evidence that we have states that we're seeing group appearances. We're seeing appearances at different times. We're seeing the appearances to people who are skeptical.
Right, theoretically different personality types.
Right, we're seeing claims of physical touch. So I think the evidence, the probability of a hallucination is extremely low given all the evidence.
And there's absolutely no reason to suspect that the disciples would have a hallucination of Jesus' resurrection. This isn't how the first century Messiah movements worked. One could say, oh, yeah, we believe that Jesus was exalted and we had a vision of that. These people knew what visions were, and things like visions or hallucinations. They knew what these things were. Some of the early Christians said, oh yeah, we had a vision of this, and they knew what these were, but that's not what they were saying about the resurrection of Jesus. These were physical appearances in group settings to a variety of different types of individuals, and the probability of Jesus appearing on the resurrection hypothesis is 100%. It makes perfect sense in the resurrection hypothesis.
Right.
But
if he's going to go with this, sorry, continue.
But the probability of these people having these experiences on the hypothesis that Jesus did not rise from the dead is extremely low. I mean, if you talk about one disciple, we're talking 10 to the negative third or so. And then when you cumulatively combine that with multiple group appearances to multiple groups and skeptics, all in the context of first century Judaism, in which they wouldn't have hallucinated a resurrection, they would have hallucinated something like an exalted Messiah, the probability of the hallucination hypothesis is so incomprehensible compared to the resurrection, right, if one is open to the possibility of miracles.
All right, so let's sorry, let's sum up. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
you can go ahead.
No, all right.
Disciples suddenly came.
Unless Jacob, Jacob has something to say? I don't.
Despite having.
Well, okay, I'll go and say it. You can pause it. So, given what Craig presents as evidence, and his argument so far is somebody stole the body, and that then the people had hallucinations.
Mm-hmm.
So is that what he's saying right now?
Seems to be.
Okay. All right, let's see
what he does with the third.
The contrary. Luke Johnson, a New Testament scholar at Emory University, says some sort of powerful, transformative experience is required to generate the sort of movement earliest Christianity was.
So again, what do you find more convincing? The idea that these people, despite their biases, were swayed by very effective rhetoric and propaganda, or that a man rose from the fucking dead?
Rhetoric and propaganda. What are you talking about?
Okay. Okay, so this he's using this negative, trying to kind of satirical connotation in his voice. He's really not giving no substance in what he's saying. He's just trying to ridicule,
asking questions.
Ridicule a miracle, and
he hasn't given any argument.
That the presupposition, like he's assuming that miracles are, since they're quote unquote magical and therefore they're improbable.
Right. He sounds like Aaron Ross. He just
so no amount of evidence can overcome the that thing, which makes his whole entire worldview of naturalism unfalsifiable.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we're on the topic of. There you go.
Yeah,
but I was confused about.
Because any evidence against naturalism would automatically be, that piece of evidence would be natural. So literally, naturalism is unfalsifiable according to his group.
I was interested in what he said, though, about rhetoric and propaganda. I don't think he quite understands what Craig is saying with regards to the origin of the belief in the resurrection. Once again, we're still talking about the original disciples who came to believe in the resurrection. What sort of rhetoric and propaganda would cause them to believe in the resurrection of Jesus, the original disciples?
Right. And also with he's saying someone stole the tomb, and then there's a hallucination. Okay, but then who stole the body? Who stole the body? Because it seems to me the only people with the who would possibly have the agenda to get the body would be the disciples. But now you're saying they're having a hallucination. So it seems to me implied that unless you're going to say just one disciple stole them, I don't know how you could do that. But his saying someone stole the body and then saying they have hallucinations doesn't follow logically to my mind.
And once again, it doesn't pass the explanatory. It doesn't pass any sort of explanatory tests either, because in terms of explanatory scope, yes, it passes that. Explanatory power, no, because you're not proposing any sort of explanation for why anyone would steal the body or who would steal the body, and you're not. And hallucinations do not explain the sort of experiences that the earliest Christians are reporting when we've got bodily group appearances.
Right.
All right, so I guess we'll stay on the resurrection for a little bit. Of any? I mean, I have a few videos that we can pull up, but you guys know of any videos that
I tried.
We could do. If you want to tackle the Anti-Citizen X one,
you did a resurrection video.
Oh wait.
Oh, no, sorry. I was thinking I'm pretty sure he did, didn't he? Didn't he not do?
No, he did.
I was thinking ontological argument, but
he did a video on New Testament. I think it was. If you go to his channel, he has a whole series on. And I think one of the videos goes into the historical, so we can check that out if you want.
Yeah, so why not?
Yeah, so historical Jesus right there, that one video right there. Yeah,
okay. All right, this is Tim's field right here.
Is he a mythicist?
You can tell that Christian.
Oh God.
Is he a mythicist?
That's a good question.
I don't know. It could be.
Oh no! Please tell me he's not.
If Richard Carrier or Robert Price comes up, we're turning it off. We're just moving on.
Oh, yeah, all right. Look, Wikipedia, right here. Wikipedia.
Oh, here we go.
So basically, it looks like he's arguing. They're anonymous. They're 40 to 70 years after Jesus. The unreliability of eyewitness testimony.
Okay, Arminian arguments. We can do that.
All right. Yeah, this is.
Apologists are fighting an uphill battle when the very existence of God is already a dubious philosophical proposition unto itself.
Why does he have Alvin Plantinga and Frank Turek on the same?
Let's suppose we're being generous and immediately decide to grant every last argument put forth by Christians thus far. What exactly would be established? Well, apparently, a powerful supernatural agent exists somewhere. He has a good knack for conjuring stable universes out of nothing, and he probably has a vested interest in how human beings conduct their personal affairs. That's really about it.
Oh, wow.
It's a pitifully weak form of deism that does absolutely nothing to differentiate Christianity from any other religious tradition. That's why, sooner or later, Christians eventually have to start defending the Bible as a reliable historical account of genuinely supernatural events. And even then, the only thing that fundamentally separates Christianity from the other Abrahamic traditions is the alleged spiritual identity of Jesus Christ. So for all the philosophical posturing and metaphysical presumptions, Christianity either lives or dies on the historical reliability of Christ's ministry and resurrection as detailed by the New Testament accounts.
Okay.
Now, before offering any criticism,
good start.
He gets that right. He gets that part right.
What exactly?
But we all know he probably didn't study for that. He just heard it somewhere.
Yeah.
Claimed here. Remember that the very core of all Christianity itself is the belief that, roughly 2,000 years ago, a half-blooded demigod born of a virgin woman.
Stop.
Straw man.
Okay. I hope he was just being. I hope he was just trying to paint a caricature of Christianity.
Yeah. If he actually thinks that, then we're gonna have some problems. But
Were we talking about this earlier, before we started?
Yep.
I feel like we brought up. Yeah.
A cosmic atone for the.
All right. It looks like we have some struggles with Christian theology right here.
Sins of the entire universe as a form of ritual blood sacrifice to appease the perfect justice of his omnipotent Father God self. He healed the sick, raised the dead, walked on water, turned water into wine, and spent his entire adult life preaching a message of divine salvation throughout ancient Judea. Then, 3 days after being crucified by Roman authorities, he rose from the dead and ascended to heaven in full celestial glory. That really is the ultimate pill you have to swallow in order to properly call yourself a Christian. However, it's also important to realize that stories like this are rampantly commonplace throughout human history.
Oh boy.
For example, Apollonius of Tyana, Zoroaster of
Oh God.
Stop. Let's do the
No.
Do Apollonian. Okay.
Oh God.
I mean, I'm sure he just heard this from Ehrman and just ran with it.
I mean,
but even someone like Richard Carrier has acknowledged that is not a comparable parallel. First of all, we've got a source written many days later in giving the pagans their own sort of Jesus character because of the early rise of Christianity. So this is essentially, and then they made him out to be a miracle worker, essentially as a parallel to Jesus for that purpose. So once again, it's not a very good parallel. Ehrman says it, but because Bart Ehrman says something does not make it true.
Arabia, Siddhartha Gautama of India, and even Joseph Smith of upstate New York are just a handful of similar prophetical figures to Jesus of Nazareth. All of them are recorded to have been divinely.
Oh shoot! I'm gonna have to reconnect again.
All right. So just wait for him. All right. I guess we'll wait for Tim. I really can't tell if he's promoting mythicism or just I don't know.
No, I think he's just trying to give some generic overview that there's been characters like this throughout history. I think that's what he's doing.
That was annoying.
All right, Tim, you can hear us now?
Yep, I'm good now. Every once in a while, I can't hear anything anymore.
Yeah, that's fine. I used to not even be able to screen share until the other day, so.
Who taught messages of spiritual salvation and even performed.
Who else did he say besides Apollonius and Zoroaster?
Muhammad, Buddha, and Joseph Smith.
Okay, so in all of these other cases, miracles are not the way these religions were started. We've got later cases such in Islam and Zoroastrianism of purported miracles, but in the cases of these religions, that's not how these religions started. These are later traditions in most cases. And with regards to Joseph Smith, I mean, if we're really going to posit Mormonism as a viable option here, I think that his criticisms and my criticisms of Mormonism historically are going to be pretty similar. So, yeah.
So on what basis do Christians pretend to know that the supernatural stories contained within the Bible are legitimate historical events as opposed to just another bunch of cultural myths, legends, and fairy tales? This is an important question to ask because the answer itself is almost embarrassing to say out loud. In short, the sum total of all evidence we have for any of the spiritual events described within the Bible is the Bible itself. Literally, the pure, unfettered say-so of human authors.
Stop the clock. So,
is he saying there's no external corroborations for?
Basically, he's saying that all we're saying is we're using the Bible to prove the Bible, and that's not the way.
Okay, that's okay.
So I don't think he understands how historians work, because
the Bible didn't come here bound in leather and verses and chapters all bound up. This is historical documents at its beginning. These were
individual documents. We're not talking about one book.
Exactly.
And the way historians look at this is not we're using the Bible to prove the Bible. We are using historical sources to give evidence for events in history. So he's essentially committing equivocation. He's committing the equivocation fallacy, because the Bible, in the first sense, is being used to say a set of historical documents, while in the second sense of using the Bible to prove the Bible, he's saying that it's using to prove a set of truth claims. So yes, we are using historical documents to prove historical claims. Isn't that's of course what we should be doing. So it all hinges on New Testament reliability then.
Millennia ago, by members of highly superstitious, illiterate cultures teeming with deliberate frauds and religion.
Stop.
Yeah, what did he say? Did he say illiterate? Did he say illiterate?
Yeah, well, he said illiterate, but even if we're okay, let's just say that they're illiterate. Well, as Bart Ehrman says, they had writers like that were actually educated at the time. So
yeah,
even if they were scribes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So even if they were illiterate, it doesn't matter because they still had scribes to write.
And someone like Paul, we've got someone like Paul. Paul would have been literate. He was a rabbi.
He was a theologian. So I mean,
you've got someone like, let's just take the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew would have been a tax collector. He would have been literate. You've got others within the early church that would have been literate. It's not like there was nobody that was literate. And the very idea of the 97% illiteracy in the ancient world has been challenged by a number of cultural scholars. But I don't really want to get into that. But I will say that it's not really that much of a consensus that so many people were illiterate.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a red herring too, because it doesn't because they're illiterate, therefore what they said is not true. Is that what he did? Because
well, I guess he's probably going to use that to challenge authorship, because that's how they do that.
Okay.
And let's not forget, in oral culture, people at that time literally did memorize the whole Iliad or the whole Odyssey.
Yeah,
that's the culture we're in.
We're seriously talking about copies that were selectively edited and compiled over multiple centuries.
Whoa. All right, go ahead, Tim.
So he's already essentially saying telephone game with regards to textual criticism, which is stupid. It's so stupid because we've got multiple lines of transmission of copying a text that was right in front of them. It's not like we've got one manuscript that led to one manuscript that led to one manuscript down the line. If that's what we had, we'd be in trouble. But that's not how textual criticism works.
Right.
Motivated committee decisions and then translated through multiple languages. That is the ultimate standard of evidence.
Well, fine. We can look at the Greek manuscripts. We'll look at the NA28. We'll get Greek lexicons next to ours, and then we can just look at that instead of English translations. We can do that just fine.
Yeah, hold on, Spartan. Pause it on that page. I want to see what is he doing? What is he saying? Craig is saying here. Let's see.
Biblical narratives are totally legit. None of it could possibly be corrupted, biased, forged.
No.
Here,
How does that?
Craig, he literally states, even if you have issues with William Lane Craig, that aside, he still will show you the scholarship into this.
Well, this is why. You see, this is why a lot of really conservatives people will attack Craig, because he doesn't presuppose inerrancy or anything like that. Craig doesn't think that there was a God at the tomb. Craig would agree with Lacona that the narratives of the raising of the saints is probably symbolic of some sort. It's not like Craig is some sort of fundamentalist who thinks that everything in the Bible is true and therefore Jesus rose from the dead. We're making a historical argument here.
Right, and he seems to be again saying, having this idea that because that the Bible is just bound in leather and comes down heaven, God sent.
Right, completely anachronistic.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the same way that we conclude some of Caesar's actions is the same way that we're coming to the conclusion that Jesus rose from the dead.
Yeah, I mean, you basically say you're using the Gallic Wars to prove the Gallic Wars. I mean,
right.
You can make the same sort of argument there, and that just shows how illogical the argument is, because eventually you're just saying you can't use history books to prove history books.
Us to embrace when determining the historical reality of supernatural events. So without even getting off the ground, the case for the historical Jesus is already so laughably empty that there's almost no point in even looking at it any further.
Oh, dear.
Nevertheless, the case of the historical Jesus
Rhetoric.
is a very
What?
Oh God.
I was just saying it was rhetoric. Just keep going.
profound epistemic question, namely, how do we know the past? That is to say, on what basis do we measure the truthiness of any given proposition about historical events? How do we know that Abraham Lincoln was an actual living person while Sherlock Holmes was not? This is another one of those complex philosophical issues that again sparks all kinds of academic debates to this very day. But even so, there are still many well-established guidelines on which every renowned professional historian necessarily agrees. We can therefore learn a great deal about history and Christianity by applying these very same rules to the biblical Gospels. For example, one of the core guidelines in all historical method says that any given source of historical information may be forged or corrupted.
Stop. Yes, we agree. Right? Everyone agrees here that it is theoretically possible that a source may be forged or corrupted. We're looking at the preponderance of the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure. But okay. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm not gonna say that yet. Let's see who he goes with it.
How much do you want to bet he'll bring up the Salem witch trials when it comes to the resurrection?
Oh boy, that's gonna be.
Then what do you think about the Salem witch trials and comparing it to the resurrection?
Well, we'll see when we get to it if he brings it up.
Right.
This is simply a fact of life, given that huge volumes of historical knowledge are derived almost entirely from written human narratives. And, whether we like it or not, human beings have the unfortunate habit of misremembering, mistranslating, exaggerating, hallucinating, omitting, or even plain outright lying whenever they commit a piece of information to paper. No matter how certain we may feel, there is simply no such thing as absolute historical truth.
We thoroughly agree with everything there, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody's claiming that you can prove history absolutely. I don't see that. Nobody's saying that.
At best, there are only varying degrees of certainty based on empirical data and probabilistic inferences to the best explanation. Now contrast this basic principle with the doctrine of biblical inerrancy, the belief that the words contained within the Bible were all divinely inspired.
Okay, yeah, I guess that would be inerrancy, but that's not.
We're not presupposing theological doctrines to talk about the historical reliability of the text.
Exactly. So like we're not assuming, we're not being fundamentalists. We're just assuming the Bible is about. It's just when we study history, we're not just assuming the Bible is true and then looking for evidence. We follow where the evidence leads, and so
right.
That's how you get the New Testament reliability.
By God himself and are therefore perfectly trustworthy as given. It's another classic attempt by Christianity to sidestep fallibilism altogether and psychologically shield itself.
Stop. So he's going to bring up mission statements on their theological doctrines of they come to a belief in those things based on the evidence. So we aren't presupposing that when making a case for reliability.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Being wrong about things, as if we're supposed to just take it all on faith that not a single one of the dozens of biblical authors, scribes, and editors was even remotely capable of this.
Their statement of faith is based on the evidence that they've investigated.
Slightest shred of personal bias, misinterpretation, embellishment, or deliberate fraud. And this is in spite of the fact that we literally have hundreds, if not thousands, of well-documented examples of exactly that sort of thing in early New Testament manuscripts.
Notice the types of textual variants.
You talking about variant? You talking about textual?
Yeah, we've got about 500,000 textual variants. That's a wonderful thing. That I'm so thankful we have textual variants.
That's just what Wikipedia researchers get for trying to.
Well, I'm so thankful we have textual variants because then we can know what the original authors said.
Right, exactly. For instance, if you have several copies out there, and you have this one guy who has a different copy and is contradictory to everybody else's copy, you can say, "Oh, this guy might have added some things or taken away some things."
And that's why we have textual criticism. I mean, with regards to the New Testament, there are only a handful of cases where it's really a matter of scholarly debate on whether or not these things were original in the text. For most cases,
isn't there like 40 lines of New Testament or
somewhere around there? I mean, it's hard to put like a just thing on there because there are a few scholars that would put a little more. Because Ehrman would be an example because, for example, he doesn't believe that in the verse that says "Forgive them, for they know not what they're doing." That one would be an example of a contested textual variant, but mostly it's the long ending of Mark, 1 John 5:7, and the woman caught in adultery. But other than that, there isn't a whole lot that's really up for textual debate today. I mean, there are, of course, a few instances, but none of these affect major Christian doctrine.
Exactly, and that's the whole point. I mean, yeah, we have all these variants, but none of these variants affect essential Christian doctrine.
Right,
So,
and the fact that we do have all these variants allows us to know that the long ending of Mark isn't
right.
a legit thing, or etc. So in a way, we should be thankful that these things do exist.
Yet most Christians apparently just don't care. They simply assume in advance that the Bible is the inspired.
No, that's a straw man.
We have, like, in what world of Christian apologetics does he live in where we don't care about textual variants? How often do we hear people talking about textual variants in the texts? I mean, do they think that we have, like, that no one's ever read Misquoting Jesus? Like, Christians themselves invented the study of textual criticism. Like, who does he think came up with textual criticism? 19th century biblical critics? No. Questioning what's been in the original text has been there pretty much since the beginning. That's why we have so many manuscripts, and that's why copying them has been so important, because we need to know what the original text said. It's not like we're completely ignorant of these things. I often harp on some apologists for talking too much about textual transmission rather than reliability of what it actually says, because in most cases the textual reliability is very well stated, while the historical reliability isn't quite as talked about as much. So I think that if anything, we talk about textual criticism too much.
Inspired word of God himself, and therefore completely free of error. Next in our list of historical methods is a simple guideline that says first-hand information is more credible than second-hand, which is more credible than third-hand, and so on. This is simply
we all agree with that? We all agree with that, right?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh boy. Oh god, the telephone. Gosh. This is real. This is why I didn't want to watch this, just because I knew he was gonna. I knew he was gonna bring it up. I knew he was gonna bring up the telephone example.
It's stuff like this that honestly makes me not really want to get into the field of New Testament reliability. It's exactly.
It's the reason why I don't. I do not debate it online. I will not debate it online.
Oh, because you get so sick of saying the same damn stuff over and over and over again.
Yeah,
right. It's just.
It's awesome,
and I'm sure I mean, it's awesome. Every Christian should study it for themselves.
But I mean, and if anyone wants to get into this field of apologetics, just be ready to hear this stuff all the time, constantly.
You basically have to act like you have to learn the basics, and so that if anyone brings it up, then you can respond to it. I think that's the best. Like, you don't have to become a scholar or something. I think it's just know the basics, so that whenever someone brings it up, you can respond to
it. Right, and then focus on whatever field you want to. If you want to focus on this, and if you want to focus on the more scientific stuff, focus on that,
Yeah, but either way, you're going to have to deal with this stuff. And it's just frustrating.
Telephone problem, where information is inevitably corrupted as it hops from one individual to another. It's also the reason why.
In what case would that ever have happened with the early Jesus tradition? In what case would you have people literally whispering things to each other in order, like?
Yeah, exactly. And you'll notice also, like, bits and pieces, portions of scripture are song. And this was a mechanism of remembering things. For instance, think to yourself how many songs you can quote word by word,
right,
to yourself. This is why scripture is designed in a way to be remembered. This isn't just some silly.
And with the case of, like, the Old Testament, kids were taught the Old Testament in similar ways to Muslims today are told to memorize the Quran. You were taught to memorize these things. We're in such an oral culture, you needed to know your Torah very well. And in the case of Jesus, with the teachings of Jesus was an itinerant preacher, and the disciples would have been hearing things like the prodigal son parable over and over and over again. So it's not like they're hearing this thing once, whispered to them, and passing it on. It's such an anachronism.
And the fact that it wasn't oral culture, and that people correct each other. I don't know. There's no scholarly books in here.
What are his sources?
Wikipedia, Scientific American, Innocent Project. Like, I mean, at least read a book.
Celsus, I see something about Celsus. God.
There might be, like, maybe one or two actual reliable sources.
Let me see one more time, Spartan.
I have it on right now, I think.
All the canonical gospels are written anonymously. Christian Bible, okay, yep.
Oh boy, he's
skeptically.org.
Yeah, he's gonna go Bible contradictions. This is interesting.
All right, let's continue.
Nothing scholarly at all.
Nearly all forms of hearsay are utterly inadmissible in any modern court of law.
I like this objection. So hearsay is actually not what he thinks it is. Why is hearsay not permissible in court? Because hearsay isn't what you think it is. Hearsay is hearing evidence that is presented outside of court. That evidence that you get outside of court and putting it into the courtroom. So an example would be like if Jill was on trial for murder in the courtroom, this piece of evidence of Jill's fingerprints being on the weapon wasn't presented in court, but hearing somebody say that Jill's fingerprints were presented in that Jill's fingerprints were on the weapon, and you heard that outside of court. That's why it's not permitted. It's basically a foolproof test for whether or not you're getting something from reliable sources outside of court. So it's got nothing to do with the common definition of hearsay as secondhand information. That's got nothing to do with what hearsay is and why it's not allowed in court.
trust it. So if the gospel narratives are supposed to be credible, then it sure would be awfully nice if they were written by the actual people who were actually there. But of course they weren't, and oftentimes are openly proud of it.
So he's assuming that. So he's. I guess we're just talking about the gospel, the Gospels, but so he's assuming that Matthew wasn't an eyewitness. He's assuming that all the patristic evidence for that is wrong. I guess. He's assuming that all the patristic evidence for Mark being the testimony of Peter and the evidence within the Gospel of Mark for that is false. He's assuming that Luke is essentially lying about getting information from eyewitnesses, and he's assuming that John was not written by the beloved disciple.
So he's basically just presupposing that they just made this all up.
He basically just took all New Testaments,
all the New Testament evidence, all the manuscripts. He's like, oh, it's all made up.
And just threw it in the trash can. Yeah, that's what he did.
For example, absolutely nothing in the entire New Testament was actually written by Jesus himself, but was instead written by other people.
Oh, no.
How was that a problem?
Why would Jesus write anything? Why
does he? What does he? Okay. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, that's basic. I have the exact same thoughts as you.
Yeah.
Oh, well, whoops.
That's funny.
Merely claimed to be recording Jesus' words after the fact. Even in the book of Luke, we find an implicit admission that he didn't actually see any of this stuff for himself, but rather that he's simply compiling secondhand accounts from various anonymous eyewitnesses. Then the Apostle Paul admits in his own epistles that no one actually told him anything about the Christ narrative, but that he...
Stop. That one's important. The other one was basically saying that Luke has information from eyewitnesses, which is good. But the Galatians one, so they're essentially equivocating on what... gospel, what is meant by gospel. The truths of God revealing himself to Paul in terms of his experience was not shown to him by any man, but that has absolutely nothing to do with actual written traditions about things like the resurrection of Jesus. And it's clear from Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 that he did have that he was getting information from other people. And Galatians 1:19 and 20 talks about Paul going up to Peter and James and essentially going on a fact-finding journey into Jerusalem, talking about Jesus. So if you interpret it in the way that he wants you to interpret it, you essentially have to say Paul is contradicting himself 8 verses later.
Yeah, and also in Galatians 2:9, I think it is, you want to go meet even more disciples who are eyewitnesses to this stuff.
Received his entire message by pure revelation alone. Many events, such as the Nativity, occur long before Christ ever met any of his disciples, and therefore cannot possibly be accounts under any.
Who said that they didn't get their information from Mary? Like,
but of course they made that up too.
Jeez.
I bet you he'll go into the. I saw this meme, but I've seen it more frequently. It's. My favorite part, it's something that goes along the lines. My favorite part of the Bible is when the eyewitnesses report Jesus praying alone or something. I guarantee we'll get into that.
Any conditions. Even the very authors of the Gospels themselves are completely anonymous because...
Stop.
Okay, no.
Bear the name of these people on their document.
With the exception of one manuscript of Matthew that doesn't have it, but that's
one. Compared to
right, and I think he's failing to realize that this wasn't just something that the New Testament did. This was common in this ancient time. This happened. This was common for text to be anonymous in that sense.
And plus, wasn't it?
But a text can be formally anonymous. All that means is that the author of the text isn't explicitly stated within that text. That has something can be formally anonymous, and you could know 100% well who wrote it. Like,
right.
Wasn't that what the church fathers did?
Well,
they're the ones that assigned those, like Mark and them.
Right, because they totally made it up. Right?
Yeah, but that doesn't make
the earliest
sense.
the earliest documentation we have of this are assigned to these authors. So
Yeah, but even if the church fathers, let's just say what he's saying true. Let's say that the church fathers made up those names and that they truly are anonymous. But what about Hebrews? That's anonymous. Why didn't they, why didn't they give a name to Hebrews?
Yeah, I think
if they were in the business of making up who wrote things.
I know.
All we have to go on is religious tradition to tell us who these guys actually were. We don't even have any original copies of the Gospels.
Yeah, we don't have any original of anything in the first century.
Yeah.
Well, he literally just he's just taken all of history and said, "Oh, well, can't believe any of it." That's what he just did. And he's not being consistent because he would. I would argue that he would not do that for anything else, like say Caesar.
Right, I'm sure he would. But the point right before that, I forget what he said right before that, but he said something stupid before that too. Oh yeah, all we have is religious traditions of who these people were.
Yeah.
So he's defining anyone who would have known them as religious traditions, something like Papias or Polycarp or Ignatius, that's all religious tradition, even though I thought he wanted things from eyewitnesses. These people were eyewitnesses to these apostles. So, I don't see what he wants.
I genuinely hope he responds to this. I want to see. I want to see what he says.
Well, I don't know, but anti-citizen is not the most cordial of individuals either. So,
Scattered fragments of copies written centuries after the fact. We even
everything else in ancient history. Like everything else in ancient history.
Exactly.
I was bringing up these
versions of the Gospels with wild variations and all sorts of crucial details with nothing more than religious tradition to tell us which are officially scripture and which are just fallible.
Okay, stop.
Scholars rejected these very Gospels right here.
Right. I mean, we know this is several years after these authors were putting names, popular level names on these manuscripts, these Gnostic Gospels. But we know they're outdated to even be these authors. So I don't.
Yeah.
Human concoction. We therefore have no idea how much of the New Testament is a reliable transmission of factual events as opposed to natural historical corruption.
Okay, so he doesn't actually give any evidence against gospel authorship except for they don't explicitly say who named them, and that we can't trust any sort of external things. And with regards to something like the Gospel of Mark, Peter is clearly whose testimony this is because of things within the text. So we can actually use his criteria of we can grant his criteria of, well, something has to be within the text, and still say that the Gospel of Mark is an eyewitness source, because things like Peter being named first and then Peter being named last is a very common technique used by people who are recording the testimony of others. So there are a number of things within the Gospel of Mark, for example, that would show that Peter is most likely the author, that Peter is most likely the source for that gospel. But once again, this guy hasn't read Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. This guy hasn't read any sort of scholarly works on the topic. He's just hearing what Bart Ehrman told him and passing it on.
Our next rule in historical method states that the more time that transpires before recording an event, then the less reliable the account becomes. This should be pretty obvious, given that human memory is notorious for omitting, substituting, and even inventing major factual details, a situation that is well known to get even worse when social pressure is added to the mix. Why do you think...
So, essentially his point here is that earlier testimony is better testimony. Do we all agree with that, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, then he goes into eyewitness memory. And eyewitness memory is we have to take it on a case-by-case basis, because in some cases eyewitness testimony is reliable, and in some cases the memory can be flawed. Like in a case of a gun, like if there's a gun in a situation, the memory is more likely to be misremembered because of that object that they were focusing on. There are a number of other cases where eyewitness testimony is unreliable, but there are many cases in which it is reliable.
Right. He's thrown the baby out with the bathwater. He's writing off these bad events, and then saying, "Oh, then everything else can't be reliable either." And I don't see how that works.
Human beings even bother writing stuff down in the first place. Memories unavoidably change over time, which is why the sooner a narrative gets recorded, the more reliable it becomes, while the later a narrative gets recorded, the more natural corruption there will inevitably tend to be. So if the gospel writings are going to have any validity to them at all, then the least we should expect is for them to be contemporary with the actual events as they transpired. Sadly, this is...
First of all, he pretty much assumes of liberal dating on the gospel traditions, because in reality, we most likely have oral traditions circulating from the very beginning. And it's not like someone just decided to write the Gospel of Mark in 70 AD. Like, they didn't just say, oh, now I'm going to write a gospel. These were traditions and oral traditions and eyewitnesses and oral narratives that were going around at this point in time already. These were already things that were circulating.
Yeah, now what about, I know I don't want to get off topic, but what about the Q? They call it the document Q, where like some of these things are written down before it was actually written down in the Gospels we see today.
Are you just asking about it? Or?
No, yeah, just because I know, you know, they didn't have to use old tradition. They could have wrote it down under document Q, but you know. So what do you think about that? I mean,
I'm pretty skeptical of Q, given that I think most of the things within the similarities between the synoptic gospels can be explained through oral tradition.
Yeah.
And that given that these were oral narratives, we and eyewitnesses, that this is what we should expect instead of it being them using these sources such as Q. Given that there is no real good evidence for Q and a number of scholars are now challenging it, I don't think that Q likely existed, but that doesn't mean that there weren't other written sources, such as notes from a disciple. Disciples of other teachers often took notes. We should have no reason to suspect that the disciples didn't take notes. Matthew would be a good example that would actually have evidence behind it of a tax collector taking notes from his teacher. Like, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Okay. Just want to make sure for the
all the case. For example, consider the Gospel of Mark, which scholars generally agree is the earliest official record of the Christ narrative.
Oh boy,
no one actually knows exactly when this.
I think we're getting into the synoptic problem here.
Yeah,
document first appeared, but there is at least a general consensus among scholars that it could not have been recorded any earlier than 30 years after the death of Christ.
That's not necessarily true. I mean, scholars such as James Crossley, who is an agnostic, have dated Mark at around 40 AD, given the early oral traditions that we're seeing there. But even if Mark was written in the 60s or at the latest around 70, that doesn't mean that this is the first time anyone ever had written or said anything about the Jesus tradition. He didn't all of a sudden wake up and say, I'm going to write a gospel today, and I'm just going to see what I can make up. Like, that isn't how things would have worked.
All right.
Decades of raw, unrestricted word-of-mouth compilations before we even get our very first official gospel. And that's our absolute best case available, because the other three gospels were all definitely written even more decades after that.
I mean, I guess you can grant it for the sake of argument, but I don't see any reason to think that Matthew was written any later than the 50s.
And even if, like, let's say if we were to say it was like 100 years after Jesus, right? Well,
it's still much better than most of ancient history.
It's still, like, look at Alexander the Great. Like, that wasn't written to like 300 years after.
Yeah, I mean, most of what Tacitus and Josephus are reporting are events that happened decades beforehand, and we're not complaining about those. Why are we just complaining about the Gospels?
So even if we were to grant him 100 years, that still is way more reliable than most of history. So.
Yeah.
And social bias inherent to any religiously motivated allegation, not to mention the superstitious, illiterate culture from which it grew, and it becomes psychologically inevitable that legendary elements would corrupt the narrative beyond repair. At this point, the case for the historical resurrection of Jesus is already decisively...
Okay, yeah. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that acts and all those other supernatural events that occur, well, that's not going to challenge the argument for the resurrection, because the resurrection argument doesn't rely on New Testament reliability in the first place.
Right.
So he's already, like, strawmanning the whole resurrection argument, you know? So, I mean, yeah, even if we were to say that all those things didn't happen, that still does not challenge the resurrection. So, I wanted to put that out there.
National dispute. Yet Christians are amazing when it comes to cramming as much failure into a single argument as they possibly can. For instance, one of the most important rules in all of historical method is the requirement that multiple independent accounts should all converge onto the same message in order for that information to be credible. This is another obvious rule based on
stop. I would probably disagree that we need that. Oh, wait, maybe not. Keep going. Sorry.
What it means is that it's far more difficult for several people to collectively misremember an event the same way than it is for only one person. This is how we know that Abraham Lincoln really was shot in Ford's Theater on April 14th, 1865. We have genuine eyewitness accounts from the crowd of people in the room as it happened. We have testimonials from the Confederate conspirators themselves admitting to the plot and carrying it out. We have the autopsy report from the guy who examined Lincoln's corpse after the fact, and we even have the actual pistol used by Booth himself to fire the shot. It's a huge variety of independent sources, all cross-confirming each other in each and every detail, with hardly any errors or inconsistencies between
Pause.
them. Now contrast.
Why is he picking a modern example? Because
Exactly. That's what I was
in
about to say.
history, we don't have those sorts of corroborating evidences. Of course, it would be better for those things, but hard.
I think your mic is messed up.
I can hear you.
I just crashed again. I'll be right back.
Well, he's obviously just using a more modern example.
Yeah, I mean, he's applying like he's taking a standard of like historical, because you know for different times of history we're gonna have different standards, obviously. So he's taking the wrong standard and applying it to ancient history, which that's not how history works.
Yeah, it's a
doing that. Like
it's a false comparison to compare something that happened in Abe Lincoln's day to ancient history, how that was argued.
Are we gonna go on? Or?
Yeah.
We're ready to go on.
Yep.
This with the gospel
I'm ready.
accounts, which often borrow so heavily from each other that they cannot even be considered as truly independent narratives. And in other sections, they'll vary wildly in all sorts of fantastic details that cannot be corroborated by a single outside source. For example, after Jesus is crucified.
Oh,
yeah.
Get into the contradictions now.
And that basically Matthew and Luke are copying from Mark. So the problem with this is it's so anachronistic. These words that is copy and plagiarize wouldn't have been used because of the oral culture. So the whole task of redaction criticism is so anachronistic. Because some of these documents were probably oral documents, and there were so many oral traditions around it. And someone like Graham Stanton, who is a gospel scholar, I'm going to quote him here, quote, "The gospel did not refer to written documents, but the oral proclamation of the significance of the death and resurrection of Jesus. So when you've got an oral culture, you wouldn't have these disciples having Matthew wouldn't have had Mark in front of him, and he wouldn't have been like, I'm going to copy this, but I'm not going to copy this part. I'm going to copy this, I'm not going to copy this part. So it's an anachronistic thing. And I'll quote one more scholar. Peter Botha is a social science expert on the New Testament. He says, the issue of written tradition and redaction simply disappears. It is not possible to think in those terms within an oral poetic. So it's simply improbable to think that Matthew and Luke would have just been simply copying from Mark. It's much better explained by the fact that these were oral traditions going around in the area.
The Gospels describe a series of very extraordinary events, including massive earthquakes and even 3 hours of darkness covering the land. You would think that if something like this really happened, then maybe a few local historians might have recorded it, or that maybe the local astronomer
stop.
noticed the sun plotting over.
That's a argument from silence. Literally,
it's a really bad argument from silence too, because there's no ancient history. Some guy a couple months ago challenged the McGrews on this, and basically said, "Well, why doesn't anyone else report the darkness of the crucifixion?" And all you have to do is ask which historians would have mentioned this and why. There's nobody else that would have mentioned this. I guess they've got this idea that there's all this ancient history out there, but we don't have that much from ancient history. And what we have does not at all support the idea that we should be expecting someone like, I don't know, Suetonius to be reporting a local Jerusalem event.
And I think actually IP covered some of this.
Yeah, he did a video on it.
Yeah.
He's actually screenshotted this part of the video onto his video with regards to arguments from silence. So.
And in his debate with Corey Markham over on Capturing Christianity, he presented a case for actually the earthquake and the I think the darkness as well. So
to put it in more probabilistic terms, the probability of this event happening on this evidence could be a piece of evidence could be very good evidence that this event occurred. Yet, if we didn't have this piece of evidence, it would be very weak piece of evidence that this event didn't occur. So in the case of the darkness of the crucifixion, if we had a secular source that mentioned it, that would be very good historical evidence that it did occur, but not having that doesn't mean that it didn't occur.
Yeah, it's a better way to put it in probabilistic terms.
3 entire hours. But strangely enough, no such records exist, leaving us entirely with the Bible's abject say-so that any of this stuff really happened.
We have single sources for all kinds of events in ancient history.
Yeah, he keeps saying over and over again that he seems to have this idea that the Bible came down and bound in leather, and I think that's how he refers to it as the Bible.
Just a bunch of special pleading on his part, really.
It is how the book of Matthew also describes dead people rising from their graves and roaming the streets. Surely it's reasonable to expect at least a few locals to mention a sudden zombie apocalypse somewhere in their memory, isn't it?
What about all the ancient illiteracy that he was talking about before?
Hilarious.
Special pleading. Basically what this video is.
And not even the other 3 Gospels are kind enough to confirm or deny any of this stuff, and these are supposed to be reliable narratives of the exact same events. And speaking of zombies, there's one particular rule in historical method that often gets overlooked, even though it conspicuously stands out above and beyond all others. Namely, any narratives that appear to completely violate the known laws of physics are the least reliable of all.
Stop. What law?
He's pulling an Ermin. He's pulling an Ermin.
Yeah. It's a presupposition.
He's human. He's human enough.
I mean, what he doesn't realize is that even if, Yeah, the resurrection is evidence against naturalism, but then of course he assumes naturalism and uses that as an argument against, these events. So it's really
obvious question begging. Obvious question begging.
exactly question. It's just a big question begging. He's just assuming his position.
Requirement.
You can go on. I was done.
Since, by definition, such violations cannot be reliably demonstrated
Stop.
under any known.
Actually, for 2, 3, and 4, we can give evidence of modern, well, not resurrection, but resuscitation. We can give evidence from modern accounts that are well evidenced, such as Craig Keener's book on miracles. So we actually do have evidence of those sort of events happening. But even if we didn't, there has to be some sort of first evidence. Like saying that since we've never seen something before, therefore it didn't happen, is evidence that dinosaurs never existed. Like it's the principle of analogy breaks down so easily that it really isn't helpful at all.
In contrast, human accounts across all cultures are notorious for their capacity to imagine wild fantasies in total disregard to physical laws. This is how we know that stories like the Iliad or the Odyssey are totally unreliable in their historicity. They talk at length about all sorts of magical enchantments and superhuman feats, while the gods of Olympus constantly intervene in the flow of events.
Stop.
Make no sense.
I guess I'll just ask a question. Does anybody here think that the accounts in the Gospels are comparable to like the gods playing with the winds and doing all kinds of weird stuff that happens in the Odyssey?
According to Price, yeah. Yeah, but not.
I don't find healings as weird as the stuff in the Odyssey, and the Odyssey wasn't written in historical narrative. It wasn't meant to be taken as something that literally happened.
Yeah, it's a poem.
Yeah,
sure. It's poetic.
Well, it's a poetic narrative.
Yeah.
From objective historical references, but are perfectly fitting in a mythological story. The exact same thing is true for the New Testament narratives. We're talking about a guy who was allegedly birthed by a virgin who walked on.
The other thing is that miracles don't break the laws of physics. Miracles go beyond the laws of physics. If miracles, he's just presupposing miracles can't happen. That's all he's doing.
Right. Yeah. If God did this, then God would be suspending the laws of physics that He created.
Yeah. It's essentially like if I drop a box right now, am I violating the law of gravity? Like,
or if you pick up a box.
Oh, there's this video I actually came across, I think yesterday, by the channel David Funk. It actually explained the resurrection in terms of like quantum mechanics or something like that. I'll link you guys to it. It's really interesting.
Like positively or negatively?
No, positively, for a positive case of the resurrection.
Water who exorcised demons and who came back to life after 3 days of lying dead in a tomb. Events which have no physical basis in all human experience. We know that.
Hold on, pause. This is such a presupposition of naturalism. I mean, he's saying no, dead people can't come out of a tomb and walk. Well, yeah, if we presuppose naturalism, sure, but that's not what we're doing here.
Again, it goes back to the whole point of, these events are evidence against naturalism in the first place. So just naturalism is not.
The problem is that he's making a really big probabilistic error, that he's only considering the prior probability. He's not actually considering the evidence.
Exactly.
Right.
That's just classic anti-Islam X.
Sex. We know that people who stand on water will generally tend to sink.
Oh my God. Okay.
Does anybody really believe that people often walk on water? Does he have that distorted view of Christians? Do you think that we're that stupid?
Well, Mike Laconia gives a great analogy. For instance, he says, if I told you that my son was at like a swimming tournament or something like that, and he just took off running across the water, would you believe it? No. He said, but what if I told you that he did walk on water because I was holding him above the water? And you would agree with that. Why? Because his son would have an external source giving him the ability to do so. And the same thing applies to Jesus. He is God, therefore he is going to have this external, that's a source of power that's not that doesn't have to bend to the will of the laws of physics, if you will.
Caused by evil demon possessions. And most important of all, we know that dead people have a persistent tendency to stay dead. So when
without the help of an external agent.
Right.
You're just assuming, yeah, I mean,
only to rise again after 3 entire days, which should we assume is more likely? That the very laws of physics and biology were specially suspended in this one case? Or that, just maybe, somebody is telling an extravagant work of fiction? Bear in mind now
it's
that
case by case.
Sounds like it was taken straight from Hume, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Just my rules for determining history, but the rules that are designed to keep us honest and help us arrive at a functional understanding of objective reality. Violation of any one of these is already sufficient grounds for doubting the reliability of any historical account, but the biblical narratives fail at each and every one.
Okay, stop, pause it. Okay,
did everybody see the unbiased one?
Yeah, well, okay.
Go.
Is he's being biased, so therefore we should, reject everything he just said in the video because he's being biased.
All of ancient history is biased. That's not a rule. He made up that. I guess he's listening to Ehrman, but Ehrman made up those rules. That's that rule. That's not a canon of history. All of these accounts are biased. Everyone knows these accounts are biased.
He's biased, so therefore, under his own rule, we should reject what he's saying because he's biased.
Right. Exception. It's as if the Bible is going out of its way to win the title for least reliable history ever. We're talking about anonymous human narratives written decades after the fact.
Okay, pause it 1 second. I want to say something one time. Again, he goes on to say the Holy Bible is going to present something as being the least reliable. Again, God, these are independent sources that were not bound in leather at some point in history, the same as any other document. Why is he? I don't know if he thinks that or if he's just using that terminology over and over again. I don't know.
This is with obvious political and social agendas and then translated through multiple language barriers. All of them make wild claims about fantastically impossible events, many of which cannot even be corroborated internally, much less externally, by objective independent sources. It's so patently absurd that even if
someone could make that a parallel case for pretty much any ancient document, though.
Yeah.
That's how history works.
Throw the baby out with the bath.
Yeah.
Up as they went along, then it still wouldn't technically make any of it worse off than it already is. Yet the very core of Christianity itself.
Okay, pause. On what planet? Yeah, just. Why? I just want to know his motives of why these people would make this up. Give me a motive of what possible good for themselves does that bring about?
Well, nothing.
We know that they were we know that they were willing to die for this. Willing to die. I don't even have to prove that they were martyred. I just have to prove that they were willing to die, which is obviously demonstrated by the evidence. I see no reason why someone would make up the story.
Why would you make up a crucified Jewish Messiah? That's so contradictory.
Exactly. Right, and the Old Testament speaks of if you die on a tree.
Yeah, and then you have to have a resurrection to validate that, but the resurrection would have been seen as confusing to Jews and awful to Greeks.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
There's nothing.
The Jews had no concept of this dying Messiah. They expected a Messiah to come out and free them from a Roman oppression. They didn't expect someone to come be a servant and die. That's not the Jewish thing to do.
That the pan-galactic uber deity of the entire cosmos had a direct influence in assembling this record and preserving it to modern day. Information that is supposed to ultimately determine the eternal fate of our very immortal souls.
There it is right there. There it is. I told you. There it is. Sends it down in leather, right?
Hey guys, I'll be right back. Give me like 3 seconds.
Okay. That's insane. Oh my god.
All right, I'm back.
Let's finish this.
The best that God can do is relay it to us through hopelessly corrupted accounts from a dubious Iron Age cult. This is what makes Christian doctrine absolutely terrifying on a national scale. Because if you want to talk about the historical basis for the Christ narrative, then at best, the only thing we can confidently conclude is that there was probably some popular philosophical Jesus figure who served as the real-life foundation for an exaggerated messianic legend. Wouldn't be the first example of this kind of phenomenon, and he sure as hell wouldn't be the last. Yet apologists would actually...
Okay, pause it. Does he have any idea what makes a story legendary? He calls it a legend. What about the narrative is legendary? I mean, that's what I don't understand. It seems to me you would have to have a bit of more time in between the event and then it was written down.
Because miracles make him uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's what it essentially comes down to.
Exactly.
Enough evidence to justify the strong assertion that the literal Son of God came down to earth, performed miracles, and died for your sins. They have no respect for very basic rules of honest epistemology, but instead rewrite them altogether into something that can only be described as a direct effort to foster dim-witted conformity.
Okay, I don't pause it. I don't know any apologist that has argued that since the Bible says that it's true, therefore it's true. That it's a complete strong. Like, I don't know. I've never heard William Lane Craig say it. Frank Turek. I've never heard any scholar say that.
That's not how historians work at all.
I know.
Is that Tim Keller? Is that Tim Keller right there?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And we have Eric Hovind. Basically, this whole thing is presupposition against miracles and special pleading. And not to mention the fact...
That's Ann Coulter, too? What the... What?
And as far as I'm aware, you guys not argued for the New Testament reliability at all.
Okay, that Ann Coulter thing actually brings up something pretty interesting.
Go for it.
I think this is really politically motivated, this whole thing.
I mean, yeah, I definitely saw that with Emperor Atheist, as a matter of fact.
Because, I mean, why bring up things like that? Like, there is some sort of dislike towards the idea of Christianity that leads them to make these stupid arguments and straw man the case so badly.
Yeah, and it seems it's like the main focus of these channels is to attack William Lane Craig, like out of all people. I mean, not all their videos, but I'd say at least the majority of their videos. At least mock William Lane.
Oh yeah, he's...
Well, but I guess that's basically it for this terrible video. I guess while we're on the topic of New Testament reliability and the resurrection, I think when we were watching one of TMM's videos, I scrolled through one of his videos. I scrolled through like a whole slideshow apparently how the Salem witch trial disproves the resurrection. So I think we should give that a look.
Yeah, I've actually never heard that argument. Surprisingly.
Are you familiar with it?
I read Matthew McCormick's book on it. Well, book on Christianity and his chapter on it.
You guys, I gotta go. So if you want to if you're still gonna be on later, I might come back on, but probably not. So talk to you guys later.
Thanks for coming on.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think I got time for Yeah, this one right here.
How long is it?
This one is 29 minutes. Yeah, and it's by
Oh, it is Matt McCormick himself. So basically, they say that there's better evidence for the Salem witch trials than there is for the resurrection of Jesus. Because of the eyewitness accounts to it. But that all that basically does is say that, yeah, there are people who are claiming to be witches, and like, it's not really an argument against the resurrection, because we're pretty much willing to concede that people were claiming to be witches and doing some weird things at the time.
Yeah, and I mean, as Christians, not too much of a stretch to believe there's other spiritual forces at work. So.
Yeah, that's why the whole comparative religion argument against the resurrection. I mean,
is this really worth engaging?
Yeah, it seems like it's not.
No, it
seems like it's another way.
It's nothing beyond like if you've heard the
resurrection. But I mean, do you guys have any other videos you'd like to?
I don't have anything off the top of my head.
Jacob, you got anything?
Not right off the top.
Well, I guess we can just call this
one.
Oh, you got one? Go for it. What is it? I'll type it in.
We could do some SE stuff.
Yeah, let's do it. Actually, I don't want to get into this street epistemology thing anyway, so this should be a good start. But
go to Anthony Magna. Anthony, type Anthony. That should be good enough.
Yeah, right there.
Is it Magna Bosco or something like that?
Yeah.
Oh, dude, Jonathan McClatchy absolutely wrecked that other guy.
Yeah, right.
Read something.
Yeah. I mean, it just shows that when you are equipped with these answers, the entire thing has become such a useless endeavor for them. Yeah, just go to his channel. Go to playlists.
All right. Seems like a lot of street evangelism. Which one?
I'm trying to find the one with decent. Just look up. Go to the search. Not like the search on the channel, like next to about. Look up Christianity or something.
Oh, there's one with Tim McGrew.
Yeah, it's just a response video, but sure, why not?
What he's training his street epistemologists to do is to use techniques like this. They come up to someone fully unprepared, fully unsuspecting. Bam, they hit him with that. Many of you know what the knockout is, right? Ambush. A bunch of thugs deciding to ambush people, see if they can knock them out with a single punch. How does that work? Some thug runs up behind a guy and hits him in the head before the guy knows what's up. Guess what? It works. They knock some people out.
Hey, dude. You got like 5 minutes for a quick interview? No? All right, no problem. Hey, man. You got 5 minutes? You got 5 minutes for a quick... No? All right.
The thing I don't understand about this, they're going out promoting a lack of belief in God. What is the point if you don't?
What they say they're promoting is critical thinking skills, and that they pretty much assume that if you base your beliefs based on evidence, then eventually you're going to come to the conclusion that God does not exist. So it's pretty much presuppositional atheism.
How about you? Do you have 5 minutes for a quick interview? Yeah? I'm interviewing people about how they got to their God belief. They believe in a God.
That's not reasoned debate. It's not clever arguments that are designed to show that there is no God, but instead really the blunt instrument version. This isn't fine point your work. This is baseball bat level.
Are they just trying to like say Tim McGrew's honest or dishonest? Is that what they're
basically? But essentially, the thing is here, Tim McGrew, at this point when he was saying this stuff, he was talking about Peter Boghossian's street epistemology, who is the one who invented this. And Anthony Magnabosco and others have sort of deviated from what it originally is supposed to do and have made it more cordial and nice. And that is why what Magnabosco is responding to is essentially a different thing than what Magnabosco is doing.
I mean, that's true. I never thought about it like that. That's true. James, I'd like to give you a card that I have. It has my email address, and my name is Anthony. And if you want to schedule a time to meet, or you just want to hit me up on email, and if you maybe thought of a different answer, or you want to talk about it some more, hit me. All right? Email you, man. Please do. I'm going to email you probably when I get home. Oh, yeah? Probably when I get home. Will you give our talk some thought? Yeah. Did you enjoy the talk? Yeah, I really did. I really did make me think, you know? Made me think. It made me do a lot more thinking than I thought I was going to do. I can't ask for anything more, man. Thank you very much, dude. All right? No problem. This is you right here? That's me. I'm Anthony. I promise. I really appreciate it, James. Have a good one, man.
And what he's training his street epistemologists to do is to use techniques like this. Come up to someone fully unprepared, fully unsuspecting. Bam! They hit him with that. How many of you know what the knockout game is?
No. God's the only thing that actually exists.
Thank you very much.
You're rather nice.
How many of you know what the knockout game is? Right? Ambush.
So basically all Magnabosco did there is give examples of where people liked what was going on and say, therefore, that this is this wonderful practice. In reality, what McGrew is saying is not literally that they're knocking people out. He's saying that when you confront someone that has no apologetics training or anything like that with their beliefs, of course they're not going to give good reasons for them, and of course you're going to win some people. But that really isn't how academic discourse should take place. So that's the real problem with street epistemology, is it really focuses not on what's true, but on how individual people come to know what they believe, which shouldn't be the focus of these sort of discussions.
Yeah, it just seems like a big tactic, honestly. It's not like...
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of a place where you can go for like really good examples of the street epistemology method. Try cordial curiosity.
Up here.
Yeah, that's Reed. That's that Reed guy.
Yeah.
All right. Curiosity.
Yes. A reason to believe. Oh, well, I guess
this one right here.
Second right there. Sure, that one. Is there any way you can upper your volume?
Yeah. Is that better?
I expect most people went down.
It's quite a lot.
Yeah.
So I suppose I was raised like Christian, but I had it shoved down my throat when I was at boarding school. And
Can you turn the volume up a little more?
masses and masses to celebrate the masses and blah blah blah. So I thought, even when I was about 6, I didn't really get the whole Jesus thing. So I sort of rejected it even when I was a very little kid. Then I went to that very religious school, and then I rebelled and decided I didn't believe in anything. And then as I got older, I sort of just didn't know what I believed in, but I thought there was something bigger. And then I suppose I was about 7 years ago, so in my early 20s, I read Dr. Brian Weiss, Many Lives, Many Masters, and what he had to say made a lot of sense to me, and so that sort of started off my going down the route of the whole, universe, why we're here, what do we need to learn, and all the different worlds. I think, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but was it Woody Allen who was like, nothing worth knowing is, we can't understand it. Anything worth knowing is not, we're not able to understand it with the human mind, or something like that. And I find that if you look for signs, like coincidences and stuff, then that's the kind of universe leading you away. I have seen spirits and ghosts and stuff since I was a little kid, and so I know there's something else. I know there's something else there. And then someone said I went on like some retreat to support my friend because she's all into crystals and stuff, and I just went along because it was her retreat, and again it changed my life. We did various meditations and breathing exercises, and I met my son. But I don't have a son, but I held a baby in my arms and I knew it was my son. And yeah, lots of stuff like that.
Okay. There's a lot to explore here. Do you want to stick to like just the God?
It's up to you. What are you?
That seems to be like a very large topic to talk about. Could I get a sense of your confidence that a God exists? Say on a scale from 1 to 10.
A kind of organized religion sense.
In whatever sense you believe.
Okay, well then 100%. Yeah,
okay. 100%. And what would you say is the main reason why you're so confident that it's true?
Because we exist. Because of free will. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
He exists and free will?
Sorry?
He exists and free will? These are the two main reasons why?
No, we exist. Sorry.
Oh, we exist. Oh. We exist.
Yeah, and free will. How do I know that there's a universe? I think that there are too many coincidences, in inverted commas, to just be coincidences. I think, there are so many times in your life where you want something, it gets taken away from you. You go through a difficult, very difficult time. You grieve for whatever you think you've lost, but then you look back a few years later and you go, I'm so glad that didn't happen, because otherwise I would never have taken this path and come across these people and had this experience. And I just think that life is too ordered.
Gotcha. So with the too many experiences, are you saying that God had something to do with these coincidences?
Yeah.
And interesting. How did you determine that God had something to do with these coincidences?
I think of them as sort of signals that you're either on the right path or the wrong path. I think there are lots of things, physically that cannot be explained. Things like absolute gut instinct being correct, and whether you've ignored the gut instinct or not, it's turning out to be your gut telling you the right thing, and that's not a.
I'll be right back.
Gut instinct is, that's another reason that the universal God exists, is because of things like gut instinct.
Gut instinct?
Yeah.
Okay. Is this gut instinct related to how you determined the coincidences related to God, or is this a separate reason?
This is why he exists, how I know that he exists.
The gut instincts? Yes. Okay. Yes, I'm using these greens as like the reasons why.
Okay.
So you've got two main reasons, the coincidences and just gut instinct?
Yeah.
Okay.
But my gut instinct isn't that he exists, it's the fact that we have gut instinct in the first place.
Yeah. You use gut instinct to have confidence that it's true?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to use this for. So maybe one reason at a time, attributing the coincidences to this God, is that a reliable way to have confidence that this is true?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Otherwise I wouldn't believe it.
Someone from another religion came up to the table and had a bunch of coincidences in their life that they attribute to some other thing. Would that be a reliable way to come to that other thing?
I think that, I mean, I obviously haven't had a good experience with sort of organized religion. I think it serves the same purpose. I mean, I sort of say out loud to the universe or like whatever it is out there and just say like, oh my God, please, come on, can this happen or whatever. And they have someone specific that they pray to and they go somewhere to pray on a regular basis. Whereas I could literally just be right here.
Gotcha. If someone, for some reason, said no God exists at all,
yeah,
like, could they use these reasons to come to that belief?
No God exists. There's too many coincidences, and we have gut instinct. I think maybe there are arguments for and against the too many coincidences, but gut instinct, I just think is it's not yet been proven by science, and I don't think that science can yet prove that a God does not exist. So just like the is that dude who wrote that book about God delusion?
Richard Dawkins.
Yeah. So he says, or Ricky Gervais also says that, prove it, and I will believe that there's God. Like that's that. Whereas I come from the other side, just like prove that there isn't, and then I'll.
For you believe it because it's not been proven not to be the case?
Yeah, and also for those reasons.
Also
like
for those.
Yeah.
If someone could explain to you how these coincidences could happen without the God related to it at all, would that change your confidence about the God existing?
I think it would have to be a pretty good argument. But yeah, I imagine so. Again, like if it's proven that no one exists, nothing exists, that is kind of helping us out or whatever, influencing us, then yeah.
So where would your confidence be if this reason was found to be not reliable?
Oh, I'm still 100%.
Still be 100%.
Yeah.
Even without the belief, without that reason.
Yes.
Okay. And the same for gut instinct.
Well, if the coincidences and gut instinct. Yeah, I think so because. I suppose, yeah, just because I've lost my words now. Would I still believe the whole universe if...
It's hard to imagine, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that it would be quite difficult to get someone to make me believe that there's no higher power.
And if you woke up tomorrow morning without this belief in the higher power, what would be the main things missing from your life?
I suppose a reason to believe that things are happening for a reason. Every time I go through something difficult, provided it doesn't last too long, For a few weeks, maybe a few months, I can just say this is happening for a reason. I know this is going to push up something better. So without that belief, I would probably be a bit miserable.
Without it, you would be miserable.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, again, like no one can take away the experiences that I've had when I was from probably about the age of 7 that I can remember until the age of 16, having encounters with ghosts and stuff. So again, like I know for a fact that there is something not of this world who can.
If you couldn't use those reasons, personal experiences with ghosts and stuff, would that change your confidence at all?
Sorry, what do you mean?
If you couldn't use that reason, if you were convinced or something
yeah. Now we're starting to slide down the whole. So if I had not had any experiences with spirits and ghosts, and gut instinct could be explained, and coincidences could be scientifically explained.
Yeah.
Every single thing could be scientifically explained. Then yeah, of course, I'd be like, oh, well, maybe it doesn't exist.
All that stuff could be explained.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. All right, well, I think I know where you're coming from. Thanks, Louise, for the conversation.
Maybe I should have asked this at the beginning, but what is this for?
I have a YouTube channel. I just
Cordial curiosity.
Yes.
Fan.
Thanks.
Subscriber.
No way.
That's awesome. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I watch your channel.
That's what it's about. Thank you. Yeah, I have a YouTube channel where I upload it.
Now we're.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank goodness you're there. I thought you weren't at the thing. Okay.
Yeah, I was there. I went for like 2 seconds. I had to go do something for my mom, but I came.
Okay, so there you get a pretty good idea of the sorts of questions that are asked. And the thing with these people is they go after people like this. Or they go after those who can't defend what they believe in a coherent manner, because once again, he's asking very difficult existential questions of epistemology. And of course these are going to be difficult to answer for someone who's never studied that sort of thing. But does that mean that they have no warrant to believe what they believe? Of course not. Theoretically, a creationist could do the same thing with someone who accepts evolution, and the evolutionist could give awful reasons, but that has absolutely no bearing on whether or not evolution is true. And Eric said in the chat that that it's pretty sinister, and I think that is very, very true, given certain examples of people such as Tia, who is someone that Cordial Curiosity or Reed, this guy who was doing this interview, also interviewed. If you look that up, that's an example of a young person who he basically just takes them off the street, asks them deep existential questions, knowing that they aren't going to have an apologetics answer to them, and then pretty much end.
It seems like they're going after people whom they know will answer in the way that they expect, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, and then if you look at how someone like Jonathan McClatchy did against Reed, I mean, Reed just looks like a buffoon up there when it's against someone that actually knows what they're defending.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it was disgusting when you told me that they go to like nursing homes.
That is just like
they go to nursing homes?
So yeah, there have been street epistemology groups that have gone to nursing homes to do this with the elderly.
Really?
Yeah.
You know of any?
That is very shallow. I mean, that's.
Do you know of any case of got anybody to fall for their tricks?
Get anybody to what?
To like believe the crap that they're preaching at this point.
You mean like they cause them to give up their belief?
Yeah.
It happens all the time. Happens all the time.
Which is the goal.
Which is exactly that. That is the goal. And they can say, "Oh, we're looking for truth," and the thing is, they're pretty much presupposing that if the person actually is open to the truth, they accept atheism anyway. So it is so obvious what they're trying to do to promote their belief in naturalism, and through these sort of Socratic questions, that it really is not the most honest of practices, especially when it's done on either someone old or very young, like in the case of Tia. It's pretty disgusting how they do it.
Yeah.
And the entire time, I just wanted her to fire these questions right back at him about his atheism.
Yeah. And
you go.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say the biggest thing I see in it is the fact that they don't want you to use evidence. Like the evidence is what at least most apologists. The evidence is what led them to faith.
Right, and they don't like to actually get into the evidence because if someone says that if the evidence if they did this with me, obviously I've done it with some people, but I mean, if I bring up the resurrection of Jesus, evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, and they say, would that lower your confidence in your belief? Yes, that would lower my. If there was no evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, I wouldn't be a Christian.
Exactly. Of course it would. I mean, that'd be like Dr. Fauci said. If there was no evidence that Abe Lincoln existed, then I wouldn't believe that.
Right, there'd be no confidence in that belief at all. So once you get down to that, and all you've got is the evidence, they're pretty much done because they don't like discussing the actual individual evidence for the event. Boghossian himself has encouraged them to stay away from the evidence because he thinks that people don't actually believe on the evidence.
I mean, that's so stupid because, all you have to do is show one person that came to faith through looking into the evidence, and their whole shtick is, basically.
I mean, the task of street epistemology is done then because the person has a reliable epistemology. They come to belief based on evidence, whether it be intrinsic, no matter what kind of evidence. It doesn't have to be empirical scientific evidence, obviously, because that would be pretty faulty as well. But coming to beliefs based on good reason for them, that's a perfectly good epistemology. And thus, you have to start actually talking about the evidence and whether it's convincing. And they don't like to do that. So,
all it is it seems like they just say, well, why this? Why this? Well, why that? Why that? And eventually, they get you down to this level where they make you feel like stupid almost. That's at least what I see out of a lot of it.
The idea is to put the believer into a corner and pretty much force them to give up their beliefs.
Yeah.
Or you keep going and you keep presenting evidence, with regards to the resurrection, you can keep presenting. Well, how do you know this happened? And how do you know what? How do you know the disciples experienced risen Jesus? Because of the evidence from both the Gospels and the creeds. Well, how do you know that the Gospels and the creeds are accurate? Based on linguistic evidence. Well, how do you know linguistic evidence is reliable? Well, based on this philosophical assumption. How do you know philosophical assumptions are reliable? Eventually you start asking the meta questions of existence. And that's why this sophistry really has no goal. It's just an endless series of questions that is basically street evangelism for atheism.
Look at that. They can get you to solipsist. I mean, following that reason.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened. I doubt it will, but it seems. What was the guy's name that came up with it? Peter Boghossian?
Yeah.
It almost seems like maybe he figured the evidence might have been leaning towards theism, and he just didn't want to accept it. So he's like, "Hey, well, let's make."
I think he really thinks that theism is stupid, and therefore no one could actually believe this based on the evidence. That there must be some other reasons that people believe other than the evidence.
You can just flip the script and apply that same criteria to them.
Exactly, and and then they can't defend it because I mean, eventually, then they realize that this sort of questioning doesn't actually get you to truth, and you need to actually consider the evidence.
It's really just atheist, almost indoctrination. I mean, like,
I think some of them have gotten sort of away from that sort of way of doing things, but the original sort of pseudepistemology proposed by Boghossian was certainly very antagonistic and insulting and very interventionary, that he called these things interventions and that we need to help these people from their disease of belief, basically. Which, when you get into that sort of language, I mean, you're really going into dangerous territory.
And especially the fact that, theism has been shown to be normal in, little kids as young as like 2 years old. I mean, it certainly doesn't, suggest that it's true, but I mean,
I think that it gives an argument for it, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, a case it's one of those things, you add it into the cumulative case.
Right.
Sure, it gives some credence to theism, but that alone isn't.
Right, yeah, right, you said that it's part of a cumulative case Bayesian argument there, but.
I mean, and it has, and theism hasn't been shown to be the result of a mental disease or any abnormal thing in the brain. I mean, most of the population are theists.
Right.
Saying most of the population of the world has a brain disorder or something.
Right.
Yeah, it's very, and they train for this too. Like they have to go through.
They've got manuals and all, and they go to little private Facebook groups, and I tell you, some of it's pretty cultic.
Yeah, it definitely.
Yeah, there's a couple of those guys in the Apologetics Academy, I've noticed.
Yes.
So beware.
Tim, didn't you did have a discussion with one?
Yeah, I think I forget his name. He hasn't popped up recently, but they're becoming more and more common.
I even think Aaron Ra was engaged in this one time. I saw it on his channel.
Yeah, he wants to learn it, so he doesn't come across as such an arrogant, mean person, I guess.
Yeah, kind of going a little off topic, but I really think that that General Han Solo guy that I've told you about.
Yeah.
Did you see his debate with Aaron Ra?
I haven't finished it, but I've watched most of it.
Yeah, I mean, he really made Aaron look like a fool. Honestly, I mean, he obviously hasn't looked into the scholarship or anything of what he's talking about. I mean,
because
he's a mythicist. Enough said, really.
Ra's case for mythicism is just so crackpot. I mean,
wait, I can't hear him.
Yeah, Tim, you're kind of popping out.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, Tim, you're buzzing out.
I pooped out again. Oh boy. I'll be right back.
You're good. Right. Yeah, you guys should definitely check out that debate with General Han Solo. You can just type it in.
Yeah, I'll definitely say that out. I used to check out, Aaron Ra and stuff like that, but I eventually just.
Yeah, I've never really found the big guys in atheism convincing by any means, honestly.
Aaron
Ra and Matt.
Just in general, there's absolutely no evidence for atheism anyway, so.
All right, and then I don't find, especially Matt Dillon, he is so hyped up and it irritates me so much.
He really thinks he's all of that.
Yeah,
Johanna and Rock.
Like I find,
pretty much.
Check out.
I mean, he rejects quantum mechanics and Axiom S5. Like,
and then I want you to check out his debate with David Robertson. They did a 2-part series, Why I'm Not a Christian and Why I'm Not an Atheist. Check out the Why I'm Not an Atheist one.
David Robertson on YouTube?
Yeah, it's by David Robertson. Him and David Robertson. He goes on to say, he was just such a jerk. Like he said, he was like, your arguments are laughable.
Let me screen share.
Your epistemology is whack.
I'm gonna go. I'm gonna type it in and see if I can. You can see my screen, right?
Have you guys seen the video? Christian.
He's a picture. What was that?
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah. You probably have to type in versus Matt.
Wait, just go in the internal and type in. I guess Tim's having some major technical difficulties over there on his part.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna have to leave in a few minutes, guys.
All right. Wait, now or in a few minutes? You said.
Yeah, in a few minutes. I still got a little bit of time.
All right. Yeah, I gotta get going in about probably 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with my computer today. It's
again.
I'm back. Am I back? I don't know. Am I here? I don't know.
Yeah, I hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, good.
All right. Well, since I get Jacob's got to go soon, I got to get going in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to give this thing a rest today.
Yeah, we've been on here. We made a lot of progress today, I guess.
Certainly.
All right. Well, that's it. Thanks, guys, for watching.
Been a good time. Yeah.
Thanks for coming on, guys.